Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Lena's Romantasy collection. To my old friends, it is so good to see you again, and to my new friends, welcome to our family of romance lovers. I have put a lot of heart into this story, so if you enjoy it, please show some love. Go ahead and like the video, subscribe, and share it with anyone who loves a good alpha romance. Also, make sure that notification bell is on so you are the first to know when I upload. I am always curious to meet you guys, so quickly pause and type in the comments, where in the world are you listening from right now? I read every single one. Okay, are you ready? Let's begin. Chapter 1: The Girl Who Wouldn't Bow. The mud in the lower market of Eldoria was not ordinary mud. It was a thick, clinging slurry of rain, horse dung, and rotting cabbage that threatened to swallow a person's boots whole. Elspeth, Elsie Hale, hated it. She hated the damp that seeped into her woolen skirts. She hated the gray sky that looked like a bruised plum. But most of all, she hated the fact that she was currently wrestling a basket of angry mandrake roots while a parrot screamed obscenities in her ear. "Bite him! Bite the ugly peasant!" Squeaky shrieked, his gray feathers puffed up in indignation. The African gray parrot, a creature far too intelligent for his own good, was currently perched precariously on the rim of Elsie's woven basket, eyeing a passing blacksmith with homicidal intent. "Hush, you menace!" Elsie hissed, struggling to keep her footing on the slick cobblestones. "If the city watch hears you threatening the locals, they'll turn you into a pie." "Meat pie! Meat pie!" Squeaky chanted, bobbing his head. Elsie sighed, pushing a stray lock of dark hair out of her eyes. To the people of Eldoria, she was just Elsie, the hedge witch who sold tinctures for gout and salves for rashes. They didn't know about the burning heat in her blood or the strange violet bruises on her chest that were actually binding runes, placed there by a mother she barely remembered to keep her hidden. To them, she was just a girl with a loud bird. Suddenly, the bustling noise of the market died. The silence rippled through the crowd like a wave of cold water. The blacksmith dropped his hammer. The fishmonger stopped gutting a trout. The sound of heavy, rhythmic hoofbeats echoed off the stone walls. "The king!" someone whispered, the voice trembling with genuine terror. "King Alaric is coming." Panic seized the street. In Eldoria, you did not look the Lycan king in the eye, you did not speak unless spoken to, and you certainly did not remain standing when he passed. "Down! Everyone down!" a herald bellowed, riding ahead of the procession. "Make way for His Majesty King Alaric the Unbroken." Around Elsie, people scrambled. Old men dropped to their knees in the filth. Mothers pushed their children's faces into the dirt. The fear was palpable, a sharp metallic scent in the air. Elsie moved to kneel, but Squeaky chose that exact moment to make a break for freedom. The parrot flapped his wings, claws digging into the basket lid. If Elsie let go to curtsy, the basket would tip, the mandrakes would wake up and start screaming, and Squeaky would likely fly straight at the king's head. "No, you don't!" Elsie grunted, grabbing the bird with one hand and the basket with the other. She stood frozen, a statue of awkward defiance amidst a sea of bowed backs. The procession drew closer. Black armor glinted in the weak sunlight, and then the massive warhorse at the front of the column stopped. He was huge. That was Elsie's first thought. King Alaric sat atop his destrier like a god of war carved from granite. His armor was matte black, scratched from battle, and he wore no helmet. His hair was dark, shorn short at the sides, and his face was a landscape of harsh angles and a jagged scar running down his jaw. But it was his eyes that froze Elsie's heart. Gold, burning, predatory liquid gold. He looked down. Every other soul in the market was face down in the mud, except for the small woman clutching a bird. The silence stretched, agonizing and long. Squeaky cocked his head, looked at the terrifying Lycan king, and squawked, "Bald spot! He has a bald spot!" The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sounded like the air leaving the city. Alaric didn't blink, he didn't shout, he simply dismounted. He moved with a grace that belied his size, the fluid, lethal movement of a predator. His boots crunched on the stones as he walked toward her. The air around him felt heavy, charged with the static of an alpha's aura. Elsie's heart hammered against her ribs, but she lifted her chin. She would not cower. She was a daughter of the North, even if she couldn't show it. Alaric stopped inches from her. He towered over her, blocking out the sun. He smelled of rain, steel, and something wild, like a forest just before a storm. "You stand," Alaric said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Elsie's chest, "when all others bow. My hands were full, Your Grace, and my bird has no manners." "Is that so?" Alaric's eyes narrowed. He didn't look angry, he looked hungry. "Kneel," he commanded softly. "I cannot," Elsie insisted, clutching the basket. Alaric reached out. His hand, large enough to crush her skull, settled on her shoulder. He didn't hurt her, but the pressure was absolute. It was the weight of a mountain. He forced her down, his power rolling over her like a physical wave, buckling her knees until they hit the mud with a wet thud. He leaned down, his face inches from her, his lips brushing her shell of the ear. "You refused to curtsy," he whispered, the sound dark and intimate, sending a shiver violently down her spine. "Now you pray to me." Chapter 2. The Beast and the Bird. Elsie stared at the mud splattered on the king's black boots. Her heart was beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. Lycan hearing was legendary after all. "Pray," he repeated, the word hanging in the damp air like a blade. For a second, terror gripped her. This was King Alaric the Unbroken. He had torn the throat out of the southern warlord with his teeth. He ruled Eldoria with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove that was currently soaked in blood. But then, Squeaky leaned down from the basket and nipped the king's armored gauntlet. Pretty boy needs a cracker." The absurdity of the moment snapped something in Elsie. The fear vanished, replaced by the sheer, exhausting ridiculousness of her life. She took a deep breath, looked up into those terrifying golden eyes, and clasped her hands together in a mock gesture of piety. "Oh, great lord of the sour mood," Elsie announced loudly, her voice carrying through the silent market. "Grant me the patience to deal with men who wear too much metal and scare the poultry. Deliver us from theatrics, and please, in your infinite wisdom, move your boot. You're standing on my hem." The silence that followed was absolute. A pin dropping would have sounded like a cannon blast. The captain of the guard, Sir Garrick, looked as if he was about to swallow his own tongue. The peasants peeking through their fingers looked ready to faint. King Alaric stared at her. For a long, agonizing moment, his expression was unreadable. The golden eyes swirled with something that looked suspiciously like shock. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Theatrics?" he murmured, straightening up. The crushing pressure of his aura vanished, leaving Elsie gasping for air. "You call the king's justice theatrics? I call forcing a woman into the mud because she's holding a bird a bit dramatic, yes," Elsie said, scrambling to her feet and brushing off her skirts. She realized a second too late that she had just insulted the Alpha King to his face. "Stupid, Elsie. Mother warned you about that tongue." Alaric tilted his head, sniffing the air. His nostrils flared. He wasn't smelling the fear. He was smelling her. Underneath the scent of dried herbs and wet wool, there was something else. Ozone, static, the smell of a lightning strike before the thunder rolls. It called to the wolf inside him, making the beast pace restlessly in his mind. "Sir Garrick," Alaric barked, not taking his eyes off Elsie. "Sire?" The knight rushed forward, hand on the hilt of his sword. "Shall I take her head?" "No," Alaric said slowly. He stepped closer to Elsie, looming over her again. He reached out and, with a surprisingly gentle touch, plucked a mandrake leaf from her messy hair. "Take her basket and the bird." "Hey!" Squeaky protested as Garrick grabbed the basket. "Unhand me, you tin can!" "And take the girl," Alaric continued, "to the high keep." Elsie's blood ran cold.
"The dungeon?" she asked, her voice small. "No." Alaric turned, mounting his horse in one fluid motion. He looked down at her from the saddle, his expression unreadable once more. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the pommel of his saddle. "My royal physician died 3 days ago. His heart gave out when I shifted during a consultation." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the pommel of his saddle. "You have courage, little witch, or you are incredibly stupid. Either way, you don't seem likely to die of fright." "I'm not a physician," Elsie protested, trying to back away, but 2 guards blocked her path. "I sell wart cream and tea for bloating." "Then you will learn," Alaric said dismissively. He spurred his horse, the massive beast turning sharply. "Bring her, and wash the mud off her. She smells like a swamp." "I smell like honest work," Elsie yelled after him, unable to help herself. The king didn't look back, but Elsie swore she saw his shoulders shaking. Was he laughing? "You're in trouble now, Elsie," Squeaky squawked from the arms of the bewildered knight. "Big trouble. Kiss him. Kiss the dog man." "I am going to pluck you," Elsie muttered, as the guards seized her arms. But as they dragged her toward the looming black shadow of the castle, she felt a burning sensation in her chest. The binding runes were itching. Being that close to the Alpha, to such raw power, had disturbed the magic sleeping in her blood. She wasn't just in trouble, she was walking into the lion's den, and she was made of chaos and secrets.
Chapter 3: The Physician's Tower. The royal physician's quarters were located in the East Tower, a drafty, circular stone room that smelled of formaldehyde, dried sage, and fear. Mostly fear. Elsie stood in the center of the room, her hands on her hips, surveying the mess. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light cutting through the narrow arrow-slit windows. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with jars of suspicious-looking liquids, pickled newt eyes, powdered wolfsbane, and things that looked disturbingly like human toes. "Cozy!" Squeaky deadpanned from his new perch on top of a human skull that sat on the desk. "It smells like death, and socks." "It's a castle, Squeaky. Everything smells like socks and damp stone," Elsie muttered. She had been scrubbed raw by 3 silent handmaidens and shoved into a dress that was far too nice for her, a deep blue velvet that hugged her curves in a way that made her feel exposed. She walked to the window. Far below, the city of Eldoria spread out like a map. She was trapped in the heart of the enemy's stronghold. If King Alaric discovered she was half frostblood, or worse, if he discovered the chaos magic humming in her veins, he wouldn't just execute her, he would hunt her. "We need to leave," Elsie whispered, touching the hidden rune just below her collarbone. It felt hot against her skin. "Can't," Squeaky crunched on a beetle he had found. "Guards at the door. Big ones. Ugly ones." Before Elsie could reply, the heavy oak door creaked open. Elsie spun around, grabbing the nearest object, a heavy pestle, as a weapon. King Alaric filled the doorway. He had removed his armor, wearing only a loose linen tunic and dark breeches. The tunic was unlaced at the top, revealing a chest defined by hard muscle and dark hair. He looked less like a king and more like a brawler who had just stepped out of a tavern fight. He paused when he saw the pestle raised in her hand. His golden eyes glinted with amusement. "Are you planning to grind me into a paste, witch?" he asked, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "Tends to how the day goes." Elsie lowered the pestle but didn't put it down. "Are you here to threaten me again? Because I'm fresh out of prayers." Alaric grunted, walking past her to the large wooden table. He moved with a slight limp that he tried to hide. He sat heavily on a stool, the wood groaning under his weight. "I need a poultice," he said gruffly, gesturing to his left arm. The lining of his tunic was stained dark red. "Training yard accident. A rookie knight got lucky with a spear." Elsie hesitated, her healer's instinct warring with her self-preservation. "You have magic," she said. "Lycans heal fast." "Wolfsbane on the blade," Alaric gritted out, his jaw tightening. "It burns like fire." Elsie's eyes widened. She pulled Pellic back his sleeve and hissed. The wound was a jagged gash, the edges black and bubbling. "You stubborn oaf,"
she scolded, forgetting entirely that he could have her beheaded. "You walked all the way up here with this? You should be in bed." "Watch your tone," Alaric growled, though there was no heat in it. He watched her face as she worked. He was fascinated by her. Most people shook when they touched him. Her hands were steady, her fingers cool and efficient, as she grabbed a jar of silver leaf salve. "I'll watch my tone when you stop bleeding on my floor," Elsie snapped back. She grabbed a clean cloth and dipped it in water. "This is going to sting. Don't bite me." "I make no promises," Alaric rumbled, his voice dropping an octave. Elsie looked up, startled by the tone. Their faces were inches apart. She could see the flecks of amber in his gold eyes. She could feel the heat radiating off him like a furnace. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. Squeaky, sensing the tension, fluffed his feathers and let out a piercing wolf whistle. "Woo-hoo! Get a room!" the bird shrieked. Alaric broke eye contact, looking at the bird with a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. "Does the chicken ever shut up?" "He's a parrot," Elsie said, her cheeks flushing pink as she applied the salve to his arm. Alaric hissed through his teeth, his muscles bunching under her fingers. "And no, he doesn't." "Perhaps I should feed him to the hounds," Alaric muttered, though he didn't pull his arm away. "Try it, Fido," Squeaky challenged, bobbing on the skull. Alaric chuckled. It was a rusty, low sound, as if he hadn't used it in years. "You are a strange pair," he said quietly, looking back at Elsie. "Why were you not afraid in the market, Elsie? Everyone fears the wolf." Elsie bandaged his arm, tying the knot tight. She met his gaze, her chin lifting in that stubborn way he was starting to find addictive. "I've faced monsters before, Your Grace," she said softly, thinking of the mother who had bound her magic and the father who had died for it. "You're just a man with a crown and a bad temper. I've met worse." Alaric stared at her, the predator in him recognizing the steel in her spine. He stood up, towering over her again. The wound was dressed, but he didn't leave. "You will stay here," he said, and it wasn't a command this time. It sounded almost like a request. "You will heal me, Elsie, and you will pray to me, one way or another." He turned and left before she could answer, leaving the room feeling colder and emptier than before. Elsie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She touched the rune on her chest again. It was burning hot now. "He likes you," Squeaky whispered ominously. "The big bad wolf likes you."
Chapter 4: The War Room Intruder. 3 days had passed since Elsie had been forcibly hired as the royal physician, and the High Keep was still getting used to the noise. Usually, the keep was a place of whispered strategies and silent, brooding guards. Now, it echoed with the squawks of a parrot demanding raisins and the sound of a small woman yelling at the king. It was mid-morning, and the War Council was in session. The great hall was dominated by a massive oak table covered in maps of the borderlands. 12 of the kingdom's most terrifying alpha warlords sat around it, arguing over troop movements. The air was thick with testosterone, aggression, and the smell of wet fur. King Alaric sat at the head of the table, his brow furrowed. The wound on his arm, though healing thanks to Elsie's salve, still throbbed with a dull ache. He was in a foul mood. He had been arguing with Lord Drayton about grain shipments for an hour. "If the Frostblood clan moves south," Lord Drayton growled, slamming a fist onto the map, "we must strike first, burn the crop fields in the valley." "We do not starve peasants to spite their lords," Alaric rumbled, his voice dangerous. "We are not savages, Drayton." "Softness will get us killed, sire," Drayton sneered, his lip curling to reveal a hint of fang. The tension in the room spiked. Hands drifted to sword hilts. Alaric began to stand, a growl building in his chest. Bang! The heavy double doors of the war room flew open, hitting the stone walls with a resounding crash. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was not an assassin nor a messenger. It was Elsie, wearing a stained apron and holding a steaming goblet of something that smelled like rotten eggs and mint. Squeaky was perched on her shoulder, eyeing the warlords like they were snacks. "You,"
Elsie pointed a wooden spoon at the king of Eldoria. "You skipped your morning dose, again." The warlord stared in stunned silence. Lord Drayton looked like he had been slapped with a wet fish. "Elsie," Alaric sighed, rubbing his temples. The aggression drained out of him, replaced by a sudden exhaustion. "I am in a council meeting." "I don't care if you're in a meeting with the moon goddess herself." Elsie marched into the room, her boots clicking on the stone floor. She walked right past the terrifying, scarred warriors who could snap her neck with 2 fingers. "Drink this willow bark tea. Your arm will stiffen up, and then you'll be grumpy all day. And frankly, I don't get paid enough to deal with your mood swings. Actually, I don't get paid at all." "She has a point, Harry boy," Squeaky chirped, flying from Elsie's shoulder to land directly in the middle of the war map. He looked at Lord Drayton. "Nice mustache. Does it come with the ugly face?" Lord Drayton turned purple. "Sire, this insolence. Allow me to gut the bird and silence the woman." Alaric's head snapped up. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a flash of lethal gold. "Touch her, Drayton, and I will mount your head on the gate before sunset." The threat was spoken softly, but it froze the room. Drayton sat back down, pale. Elsie reached the head of the table and slammed the goblet down in front of the king. She put her hands on her hips, completely ignoring the death threat that had just been issued on her behalf. "Drink. It tastes like swamp water, but it helps the inflammation." Alaric looked at the goblet, then up at Elsie. Her hazel eyes were fierce, challenging him. For the first time all day, the knot of tension in his chest loosened. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of his generals. She was just annoying, caring, and utterly fearless. He picked up the goblet and downed the foul mixture in one gulp. He grimaced. "You are trying to poison me. If I wanted to poison you, I'd use hemlock. It's faster and smells like carrots," Elsie retorted, taking the empty goblet. "Now sit up straight. Your posture is terrible for a king." Alaric actually straightened his spine. The warlords watched in disbelief. The beast of the north, the unbroken king, was being scolded by a slip of a girl like an unruly pup. And worse, he seemed to enjoy it. "Go," Alaric murmured to her, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "Before Drayton has an aneurysm." I'm going," turning to leave, Elsie whistling for Squeaky. The parrot hopped back on her shoulder, but not before pooping directly on the marker representing Lord Drayton's castle. "Oops," Squeaky squawked. As the doors closed behind her, Alaric looked back at his stunned council. He felt strangely lighter. "Now," Alaric said commandingly, "about those grain shipments."
Chapter 5. The White Wolf's Arrival. The peace of the High Keep did not last long. 2 days later, the trumpets sounded from the battlements, a high, piercing clarity that signaled royalty. Elsie was in the herb garden, harvesting fresh rosemary, when the gates groaned open. The courtyard filled with a retinue of knights in silver armor, their banners fluttering in the wind. The sigil was a white wolf on a field of blue. "Trouble," Squeaky muttered from the branch of an apple tree. He fluffed his feathers, his black beak clicking nervously. "Smells like expensive perfume and evil." Elsie wiped the dirt from her hands and stood up. She watched as a carriage, painted in pearl and silver, rolled to a halt. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was breathtaking. That was the only word for it. Tall, slender, with hair the color of spun moonlight cascading down to her waist. Her skin was flawless porcelain, and her dress was a masterpiece of white silk and silver thread. This was Lady Genevieve, the High Priestess of the Lunar Order and the daughter of the Southern Alpha. She was the woman the Council wanted Alaric to marry. She was a pureblood. Alaric descended the main stairs to greet her. He looked regal in his black tunic, but Elsie noticed the stiffness in his shoulders. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect between alphas. "Lady Genevieve," Alaric's voice carried across the courtyard. "Welcome to Eldoria." "King Alaric," Genevieve curtsied deep and graceful, like a swan bowing its neck.
When she rose, her smile was perfect, practiced, and didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were a pale, icy blue. The journey was long, but the sight of you is reward enough. Elsie felt a strange, hot prickle in her chest. Jealousy? No, she told herself. It was just indigestion, or the binding runes acting up. Genevieve moved forward to take Alaric's arm, but then she stopped. Her head tilted. She sniffed the air, her delicate nose twitching. Her gaze swept the courtyard, scanning past the knights, the servants, and landing with laser precision on Elsie. The high priestess frowned. She detached herself from Alaric and walked straight toward the herb garden. Her movement was predatory, smooth, and silent. Elsie stood her ground, though her instincts screamed at her to run. Squeaky let out a low, warning hiss. Genevieve stopped at the edge of the garden dirt, careful not to soil her silk slippers. She looked Elsie up and down, her lip curling in distaste. "What is this?" Genevieve asked, her voice like tinkling glass. She didn't look at Elsie's face. She looked at her dirty apron, her wild hair, the dirt under her fingernails. "This is Elsie," Alaric said, appearing behind Genevieve. His voice was tight. "My healer." "A healer?" Genevieve laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "She smells of mongrel blood and dirt. Surely, Alaric, you do not let this creature touch you. The royal physician should be a person of status, not a hedge witch from the gutter." Elsie felt her temper flare. The heat in her chest intensified. She opened her mouth to retort, but Squeaky beat her to it. "Nice hair, lady. Is it wig? It looks like a wig." Genevieve gasped, her hand flying to her hair. "What is that abomination?" "That is my assistant," Elsie said sweetly, stepping forward. She refused to bow. "And he has a very keen eye for synthetic materials, my lady." Alaric coughed to hide a laugh. Genevieve turned scarlet. Her icy eyes locked onto Elsie's, and for a second the human mask slipped. Elsie saw the wolf inside her, a cruel, vicious thing. "You are insolent," Genevieve hissed, low enough that only they could hear. "I am the future queen of this rock pile, and when I am, I will have you skinned and that bird roasted." "I'd like to see you try, Frosty," Elsie whispered back, her fear replaced by a sudden, reckless anger. Genevieve narrowed her eyes. She leaned in close, sniffing Elsie again, her nose twitching. "You smell strange, girl, like a storm that shouldn't exist." She pulled back, a suspicious glint in her eye. She had sensed something dangerous. "Come, Alaric," Genevieve said loudly, turning her back on Elsie as if she were a bored servant. "Show me to my chambers. I must wash the stench of the commoners off my skin." As they walked away, Elsie clutched her chest. The rune was burning so hot it felt like a branding iron. Genevieve was a threat, not just to her job, but to her life.
Chapter 6. The Leaking Seal. That night, the pain in Elsie's chest became unbearable. She was alone in the physician's tower. The moon was rising, full and bright, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Squeaky was asleep on his perch, his head tucked under his wing, snoring softly. Elsie stood before the small polished mirror on the wall, her hands shaking as she unlaced the top of her dress. She pulled the fabric down to reveal her collarbone. The skin was angry red. Beneath the surface, the black ink of the binding runes, intricate spirals and ancient symbols, was pulsing with a faint violet light. "Stop it," she whispered to herself, pressing her cold hand against the heat. "Stay down, stay hidden." Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, a frantic whisper from 10 years ago. "You must never let the emotions take you, Elspeth. Fear, rage, love, they are the keys. If the seal breaks, the king will hunt you. Your uncle will find you. You are chaos-born." Being near Alaric, his alpha power, his intensity, had eroding the seal, and Genevieve's arrival had triggered her anger, cracking the dam further. Elsie reached for a jar of numbing salve on the shelf, but as her hand moved, she didn't touch the jar. Crack! The heavy glass jar shattered on the shelf, 3 inches away from her fingers. The thick ointment splattered everywhere.
Elsie froze. She hadn't touched it. A tendril of violet energy, thin as a spiderweb, was drifting from her fingertips. "No!" she gasped, clutching her hand to her chest. "No, no, no!" Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. "Elsie?" It was Alaric. Panic seized her. The air in the room was humming with static electricity. The shattered glass lay on the floor. Her chest was glowing. "Just a moment," she squeaked, her voice cracking. She frantically pulled her dress up, lacing it clumsily. She grabbed a towel and threw it over the spilled ointment and glass. She waved her hands to disperse the ozone smell of magic. The door handle turned. It was locked, but the latch groaned under the pressure of an alpha's hand. "Elsie, I smell blood." Alaric's voice was urgent now. "Open the door." She rushed to the door and threw the bolt. Alaric pushed it open immediately, stepping inside. He was still dressed in his formal tunic from dinner, looking tired and irritated. But the moment he saw her, his expression softened into concern. "You're pale," he said, stepping closer. He sniffed the air, and what is that smell? Like lightning? I spilled some sulfur for a potion, and I cut my finger cleaning it up. It's nothing." Alaric narrowed his eyes. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on the towel covering the mess on the shelf. He looked back at her, stepping into her personal space. "You are shaking," he murmured. He reached up, his large, warm hand covering her cold ones. The contact was electric. A jolt of energy passed between them. Not magic, but something purely physical. The bond. Elsie felt the rune on her chest flare painfully, protesting the closeness. She winced. Alaric frowned. He moved his hand up, toward her neck, toward the hidden glow beneath her dress. "Are you hurt here?" "No!" Elsie pulled away sharply, turning her back to him. She pretended to be busy with a stack of parchment. "I'm just tired, Your Grace. It's been a long day. Lady Genevieve, she has a strong personality. It's draining." Alaric lowered his hand. He watched her back, sensing her distress, but not understanding the cause. He thought she was intimidated by her betrothed. "Genevieve is necessary," Alaric said, his voice flat. "The council demands a union, a pure-blood heir." "Of course," Elsie said, her voice hollow. "She is very beautiful, and she doesn't carry birds around." Alaric stepped closer again, standing right behind her. She could feel the heat of his body. "She is not you," he whispered. The admission hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Elsie closed her eyes. "Don't," she thought. "Don't make me hope. If you knew what I was, you would kill me." "Go to sleep, Alaric," she whispered. He hesitated. For a moment she thought he might turn her around and kiss her. The air crackled with the possibility. But then he sighed. "Good night, Elsie," he said. He left, closing the door softly. Elsie collapsed onto the floor, clutching her chest. Tears pricked her eyes. The violet light beneath her skin was brighter now. The seal was failing, and she was falling in love with the executioner.
Chapter 7. The Feast of Thorns. The great hall of the High Keep was a cavernous space of stone and shadow, usually smelling of damp dogs and roasted meat. Tonight, however, it smelled of lavender and hypocrisy. A feast was being held in honor of Lady Genevieve's arrival. Long trestle tables groaned under the weight of venison, suckling pig, and flagons of spiced wine. The nobility of Eldoria, Lycans and humans alike, had gathered to gawk at the future queen. Elsie had tried to hide in her tower with a bowl of stew and a book on poisonous fungi, but Sir Garrick had arrived with a summons. The king required his physician in attendance, in case the excitement causes palpitations. "He just wants to stare at you," Squeaky had whispered helpfully as Elsie laced up her only formal dress, the blue velvet one Alaric had provided. Now, Elsie sat at the far end of the high table, squeezed between a death baron and a decorative vase. She felt painfully out of place. At the center of the table, King Alaric sat on his carved wooden throne. He wore a tunic of crushed black velvet, a silver circlet resting on his brow. He looked majestic,
lethal, and utterly bored. Beside him, Genevieve was a vision in shimmering silk, her hand resting possessively on his forearm. "The venison is exquisite, my king," Genevieve purred, her voice carrying over the din of the hall. "Though it is a shame about the company, I see the servant girl is dining with the lords tonight." The table went quiet. Alaric took a slow sip of his wine. He didn't look at Genevieve. He looked down the table, his golden eyes locking onto Elsie. "Elsie saved my arm, Genevieve," Alaric said, his voice calm but carrying a warning edge. "In this kingdom, we value competence over pedigree." Genevieve's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened into chips of ice. "Quaint. In the South, we keep the help in the kitchen. It prevents confusion." Elsie gripped her goblet tight. The binding rune on her chest flared hot, reacting to the insult. She wanted to say something, but she knew one wrong word could get her banished. Suddenly, a gray blur swooped down from the rafters. Squeaky, who had been explicitly banned from the feast, dive-bombed the table. He didn't land on Elsie's shoulder. Instead, he landed directly in the center of the roast pig platter in front of Genevieve. Gravy splashed onto the high priestess's pristine white silk bodice. The hall gasped. Genevieve shrieked, jumping up and knocking her chair over. "Get it off! Get the vermin off!" Squeaky plucked a cherry from the pig's mouth and looked at her. "Nice dress," the parrot squawked loudly. "Looks better with gravy. Gravy queen! Gravy queen!" Laughter rippled through the hall. It started with the drunken knights at the lower tables and spread upward. Even the deaf baron beside Elsie chuckled. Genevieve's face turned a mottled shade of red. She pointed a trembling finger at Elsie. "Control your beast, or I will have the guards skewer it." Elsie stood up, her fear eclipsed by the need to protect her friend. "He's not a beast, my lady. He's a critic, and frankly, the gravy does add a nice color." Alaric slammed his hand on the table. The laughter died instantly. He looked at Genevieve, who was frantically wiping at her dress, and then at Elsie, who stood defiant with a gravy-covered parrot now flying to her shoulder. The king brought his fist up to his mouth. He coughed, but Elsie knew that cough. He was hiding a smile. "Sir Garrick," Alaric demanded, his voice shaking slightly, "escort Lady Genevieve to her chambers so she may change, and Elsie, take the bird to the tower before he decides to critique the wine." As Genevieve stormed out, humiliated and radiating murder, Alaric caught Elsie's eye. He winked, a single, slow wink. Elsie's heart did a traitorous flip in her chest. She hurried out of the hall, clutching Squeaky, unaware that she had just made an enemy who would no longer be satisfied with insults. Genevieve wanted blood.
Chapter 8. Moonlight and Scars. The feast had ended hours ago, but Elsie couldn't sleep. The energy in the castle was jagged. The full moon was only 2 nights away, and the air felt heavy with the impending shift. Squeaky was dozing on the back of a chair, muttering about cherries in his sleep. Elsie needed air. She threw a heavy woolen cloak over her night shift and crept out of the tower, heading for the battlements. The night air was crisp and cold, biting at her cheeks. The moon hung low and heavy, bathing the stone ramparts in a ghostly silver light. She wasn't alone. A dark figure stood at the edge of the wall, looking out over the sleeping city. It was Alaric. He had discarded his fine tunic and wore only a loose white shirt, open at the chest to the biting wind. He gripped the stone ledge so hard his knuckles were white. Elsie froze, intending to turn back, but his head snapped toward her. "You shouldn't be here," he growled. His voice wasn't human. It was deeper, roughened by the vocal cords of the wolf pushing at his skin. "I couldn't sleep," Elsie said softly, holding her ground. She walked toward him, ignoring the warning bells in her head. "The air is too thick." "It's the moon." Alaric turned back to the horizon. "She sings to us, demands we hunt. It is painful to resist." Elsie reached his side.
She could see the tension in his body, the way his muscles coiled and spasmed. The scar on his jaw looked stark white in the moonlight. "Is that why you are out here? To protect the castle from yourself?" Alaric let out a bitter laugh. "I am a monster, Elsie. A king by day, a beast by night. Genevieve understands this. She fears it, but she accepts it as the price of power. You should be running." He turned to face her fully. His eyes were glowing brighter than she had ever seen them, molten gold, swirling with feral hunger. "Why don't you run?" he whispered, stepping closer. "I could tear you apart before you could scream." Elsie looked up at him. The binding rune on her chest throbbed, not with pain this time, but with a strange harmonic resonance. Her chaos magic wasn't afraid of his wolf. It recognized a kindred storm. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and placed her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. It was beating frantically, a drum beat against her fingers. "I don't run because I know what it's like to have something inside you that you can't control, something that scares you." Alaric went still. The contact of her skin against his seemed to ground him. He covered her small hand with his large one, pressing it harder against his chest. "You are a witch, Elsie," he murmured, leaning down until their foreheads touched. "But you smell like peace. How is that possible?" "Maybe you just need the right prayer," Elsie whispered, referencing his command from the market. Alaric groaned, a low sound of longing. He tilted his head, his nose brushing against her neck, inhaling her scent deeply. For a moment, Elsie thought he would kiss her. She wanted him to. The pull was magnetic, undeniable. "Go," Alaric said, suddenly pulling back. He looked pained. "Go back to your tower, Elsie, before I forget that I am a king and remember only that I am a wolf." Elsie hesitated, her hand lingering in the air where his chest had been. "Good night, Alaric," she whispered. She turned and fled back to the safety of her room, leaving the king alone with the moon and his hunger. She didn't see him watch her go, a look of desperate possession on his face, and she didn't see the shadow that detached itself from the doorway of the keep, a spy of Genevieve's who had seen everything.
Chapter 9. The Serpent's Smile. The following morning, the summons came not from the king, but from Lady Genevieve. A servant in the white and blue livery of the Southern Pack knocked on the tower door. "Her ladyship requests your presence for tea. She wishes to apologize for the misunderstanding at the feast." Elsie frowned. She was grinding dried valerian root. Squeaky was busy tearing up a pillow. "It's a trap," Squeaky said, pausing with a beak full of feathers. "She's going to poison you or feed you to a cat. Don't go." "I have to," Elsie sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "If I refuse, I insult the future queen. Alaric has enough political headaches without me starting a war." "Take a dagger," Squeaky advised. "Stab her in the shin." "I will not stab the high priestess," Elsie rolled her eyes. "Stay here. If I'm not back in an hour, tell Alaric." Elsie made her way to the guest wing. The opulence here was stifling. Thick tapestries, gold sconces, and the overwhelming scent of rosewater. Genevieve was seated on a velvet chaise lounge, looking every inch the repentant noblewoman. Her dress was pristine pale pink, her hair braided intricately with pearls. "Elsie," Genevieve smiled. It was a perfect smile, too perfect. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." Elsie sat on the edge of a hard wooden chair. "My lady, I behaved poorly last night. The travel, the stress. I am afraid I took it out on you. Alaric cares for you, and if he trusts you, then I must try to be civil." She pushed a delicate porcelain cup toward Elsie. The tea smelled of chamomile and honey. "I accept your apology," Elsie said cautiously. She didn't drink. Genevieve noticed the hesitation. She picked up her own cup and took a sip.
It is not poisoned, silly girl, see? We are just two women discussing the king. Tell me, does he speak of me?" Elsie relaxed slightly. "Just vanity, then. He respects you, my lady. He speaks of the alliance often." Genevieve's smile tightened. "Respect, yes, that is what we are bred for." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "But respect is cold, isn't it? Passion, that is what men want. That is what he finds in you, isn't it? The exotic little witch." "I am just his healer," Elsie said, her heart hammering. "Of course," Genevieve stood up, walking to the window. "But healers can be dangerous. They know too much. They get too close." She turned back, and the mask was gone. Her face was cold, hard, and cruel. "Drink your tea, Elsie." "I'm not thirsty." Elsie stood up to leave. "I didn't ask." Genevieve snapped her fingers. From the shadows of the room, 4 large guards stepped out. They weren't wearing the king's black. They wore the silver of Genevieve's personal guard. Elsie reached for her magic, for the spark in her chest, but before she could focus, a cloth was pressed over her face from behind. It smelled of chloroform and damp earth. She struggled, kicking out. Her heard Squeaky's voice in her head yelling, "Danger!" but it was too late. "You are a distraction, and distractions must be removed. The enchanted forest is lovely this time of year. I hear the wolves are starving." Elsie's vision blurred. The last thing she saw was Genevieve sipping her tea, watching her fall with a look of serene satisfaction. "Sleep tight, little witch," Genevieve whispered. Then the world went black.
Chapter 10. A Carriage to Nowhere. Consciousness returned to Elsie in painful, jagged fragments. First came the throbbing headache, a rhythmic pounding behind her eyes that matched the erratic swaying of the floor beneath her. Then came the smell, musty straw, unwashed bodies, and the iron tang of rust. She groaned, trying to sit up, but her hands were bound tightly behind her back with rough hemp rope. The coarse fibers bit into her wrists, chafing the skin raw. "She's awake," a gruff voice grunted from the shadows. Elsie blinked, her vision swimming. She was in the back of a covered wagon, the canvas flaps tied down to block out the light. 2 men sat opposite her, wearing the silver and blue tabards of Lady Genevieve's personal guard. They looked bored, playing a game of dice on a crate. Where are you taking me?" Elsie croaked, her throat dry as parchment. "South." One of the guards lied, not bothering to look up from his dice. "Lady Genevieve has generously arranged for your deportation. You're going to work in the sulfur mines."
"Liar!"
A shrill voice squawked from the corner. Elsie's head snapped to the right. There, stuffed into a tiny, rusted bird cage that rolled on the floor with every bump of the wagon, was Squeaky. The parrot looked furious, his feathers ruffled and one wing slightly askew. "Squeaky!" Elsie gasped. "Are you all right?"
"I'm in a cage,"
the bird shrieked, rattling the bars with his beak.
"like a common pigeon. When I get out, I'm going to peck their eyes out. I'll make necklaces from their teeth."
"Shut the bird up," the second guard growled, kicking the cage. Squeaky tumbled over, squawking indignantly. "Don't touch him!" Elsie surged forward, fueled by a sudden spike of rage, but the wagon hit a massive rut, throwing her back against the wooden slats. The wagon began to slow. The air coming through the gaps in the canvas changed. It no longer smelled of the open road or the city. It smelled damp, heavy, and ancient. It smelled of pine needles rotting on a forest floor and a cold mist that clung to the bones. "We're here," the first guard said, stowing his dice. The wagon halted. The guards grabbed Elsie by her arms and dragged her to the back. They threw the canvas flaps open. Elsie gasped. They weren't at a mine. They were at the edge of the whispering woods, the border of the enchanted forest. The trees here were wrong. They were too tall, their bark black and twisted like agonized faces.
The canopy was so thick it blotted out the sun, turning midday into an eternal gloomy twilight. A thick, unnatural fog curled around the massive roots. Out, the guard shoved her. She stumbled, falling from the wagon bed into the wet, mossy earth. The second guard picked up Squeaky's cage and tossed it into the mud beside her. The door of the cage popped open at impact. Squeaky scrambled out, looking dazed but unhurt. "Lady Genevieve sends her regards," the guard sneered, looking down at Elsie. "She said nature should take its course. The wolves are hungry this year, and there are other things in these woods." "Alaric will kill you," Elsie whispered, struggling to her knees, "when he finds out. The king will be told you ran away, you stole from the treasury and fled, a common thief." With a crack of the whip, the horses reared. The wagon turned sharply, mud spraying over Elsie's dress. She watched as they thundered away, leaving her alone in the silence. But it wasn't silent. As the sound of the wagon faded, the forest began to wake up. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled without wind. From the deep shadows of the trees, a low, chittering sound emerged, like 1,000 insects grinding their teeth. Elsie struggled against her ropes. "Squeaky, come here." The parrot hopped onto her shoulder, pressing his warm body against her neck. He was trembling. "Bad place, bad place, Elsie," the parrot whispered, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance.
Chapter 11. The Shadow in the Mist. The enchanted forest was not a place of fairy tales. It was a place of nightmares. The legend said that the trees fed on blood, and the fog fed on fear. Elsie had managed to saw through her ropes using a jagged piece of flint she found in the mud, but it had taken hours. By the time her hands were free, true night had fallen. The darkness was absolute, save for patches of luminescent fungi that glowed a sickly green on the tree trunks. "We need shelter," Elsie whispered, hugging her arms to her chest. The temperature had plummeted. Her velvet dress, once beautiful, was now torn and soaked with dew. "Tree," Squeaky suggested, his claws digging into her shoulder painfully. "High up, big teeth down here." Elsie stumbled forward, feeling her way through the mist. Every shadow looked like a wolf. Every rustle sounded like a stalker. She thought of Alaric. Was he looking for her, or did he believe Genevieve's lie? The thought that he might think she stole from him and ran away broke her heart more than the cold. "He forced you to your knees," a voice in her head whispered. "He is a king. You are nothing." "No," Elsie said aloud, her voice trembling. "He knows me." Snap. The sound was loud, like a bone breaking. It came from directly behind her. Elsie froze. Squeaky went rigid on her shoulder. "Did you hear that?" she breathed. "Big," Squeaky squeaked, barely audible. "Big thing." Slowly, Elsie turned around. At first, she saw nothing but the swirling fog. Then 2 lights appeared in the darkness, about 7 feet off the ground. They weren't yellow like a wolf's eyes. They were a dull, rotting crimson. A low growl vibrated through the ground, shaking the soles of Elsie's boots. It wasn't a clean animal growl. It was wet, gurgling, like liquid bubbling in a lung. From the mist emerged a nightmare. It was a bear, or it had been once. Now it was another beast. Its fur was patchy and matted with black ichor. Patches of bone were visible through the rotting skin. It stood on its hind legs, towering over 10 feet tall, its claws as long as daggers and dripping with venom. Elsie backed away, her foot catching on a root. She scrambled backward, hitting the trunk of a massive oak tree. She was trapped. "Go, Squeaky," Elsie commanded, her voice high with panic. "Go fly away. Find Alaric." "No," Squeaky puffed up his chest. "I protect. Mama said protect." "Squeaky, please," Elsie cried, as the beast dropped to all fours and charged. It moved with terrifying speed for something so large, tearing up the earth as it came.
Elsie scrambled to the side, diving into a patch of ferns. The bear's claws smashed into the oak tree where she had been standing a second ago, splintering the wood like a sound of thunderclap. The beast roared, spraying slime and rot. It turned its massive head, locking onto Elsie again. It raised a paw to strike. "Eat lead, ugly!" Squeaky screamed. The parrot launched himself from a branch. He was a tiny gray missile against a mountain of rotting muscle. He flew straight for the beast's face, pecking viciously at its crimson eye. The bear roared in annoyance, shaking his head. Squeaky flapped his wings, scratching and biting, trying to buy his mistress time. "Run, Elsie, run!" the bird screeched. But Elsie couldn't run. She watched in horror as the bear raised a massive paw and swatted the air. Thwack! The blow connected. Squeaky was swatted out of the air like a fly. He hit a tree trunk with a sickening crunch and fell into the moss, motionless. A few gray feathers drifted slowly down in the silence. "Squeaky?" Elsie whispered. The bird didn't move. The bear turned back to Elsie, satisfied with the distraction. It loomed over her, ready to deliver the killing blow. But Elsie wasn't looking at the bear anymore. She was looking at the small, broken bundle of feathers in the moss. Something inside her chest, something hot, ancient, and terrifying, snapped. The binding rune over her heart didn't just heat up, it dissolved.
Chapter 12. The Storm Unleashed. The forest went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The nether bear hesitated. Its primal instincts, dulled by corruption, suddenly screamed a warning. The prey in front of it was no longer prey. Elsie stood up. She didn't scramble, she didn't shake. She rose with an eerie, fluid grace, like a puppet being pulled upright by invisible strings. She looked at the bear. Her hazel eyes were gone. In their place were pools of solid, glowing violet light. "You hurt him," Elsie said. Her voice wasn't her own. It was a chorus of 1,000 voices, layered over one another, the sound of a storm trapped in a human throat. The bear roared, trying to reassert its dominance. It lunged, jaws snapping for her head. Elsie raised a hand. She didn't chant a spell. She didn't throw a fireball. She simply pushed. A wave of violet energy erupted from her palm. It hit the massive beast mid-air. The bear didn't fly backward. It stopped. It froze in space, suspended by gravity that no longer obeyed the laws of nature. The beast whined, a high-pitched sound of terror. "You are nothing," Elsie whispered. The violet light intensified, bathing the clearing in a harsh, supernatural glow. The trees around them began to rattle. Stones floated up from the ground, circling Elsie like a protective halo. She clenched her fist. The bear began to unmake. It wasn't burning, it was unraveling. The corruption, the flesh, the bone, it was being pulled apart atom by atom. The creature roared in agony as it dissolved into black dust, stripped away layer by the sheer force of chaos magic. Within seconds, the 10-foot monster was gone, erased from existence. Not even a stain remained on the ground. Elsie stood alone in the swirling vortex of power. Her hair floated around her face, defying gravity. The air smelled of ozone and shattered reality. She turned her glowing eyes to the mossy patch where Squeaky lay. She floated, her feet not touching the ground, over to the bird. She knelt, the violet light dimming slightly, softening. She scooped up the broken body of the parrot. His wing was bent at a grotesque angle. His small chest was still. The spark of the storm spirit within him was fading, flickering out like a candle in a gale. "No," Elsie whispered, her own voice bleeding back into the chorus. "Not you. I won't let you go."
She pressed her glowing hand over the bird's chest. The chaos magic, usually a force of destruction, obeyed her will. It shifted. It became creation. Amethyst tendrils wrapped around Squeaky. There was a series of small cracks and pops as bones knit themselves back together. Feathers regrew in seconds. The bruising vanished. Squeaky gasped, his eyes flying open. He shook his head, looking around wildly. "Did I win?" Squeaky squawked, jumping up and flapping his wings. "I think I won. Did you see that right hook?" He looked at Elsie. He saw the glowing eyes, the floating rocks, the aura of terrifying power radiating off her. Squeaky went quiet. He bowed his head, a genuine gesture of reverence he had never shown anyone. "Mistress, the seal is broken." Elsie looked at her hands. They were glowing. She could feel everything, the sap in the trees, the heartbeat of a deer a mile away, the ley lines running under the earth. She wasn't just a hedge witch, she was a calamity. "Genevieve," Elsie said. The name came out as a curse. The violet light in her eyes sharpened into a blade. "She wanted a monster? I'll show her a monster." Elsie turned south, toward the castle. She didn't walk. She moved with the speed of the wind, the forest parting before her, terrified of her presence. The witch was coming back, and she was going to bring the sky down with her.
Chapter 13. The Gates of Judgment. The sun was beginning to rise over the kingdom of Eldoria, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. But the warmth of the dawn did not reach the city gates. A strange, unnatural chill had descended, rolling down from the distant tree line of the whispering woods like a fog of impending doom. At the main gate, 2 guards stood watch, leaning on their halberds. They were yawning, bored by the night shift. "Did you hear the wolves howling last night?" one guard asked, rubbing his eyes. "Sounded close. Too close." "Probably smelling the garbage from the lower quarter," the second guard grunted. "Or maybe they caught that runaway thief, the king's physician. Heard she stole a necklace and bolted." "Shame," the first guard spat. "She was pretty. Feisty, too." Suddenly, the birds in the nearby trees went silent. The wind died. A heavy, vibrating hum filled the air, a sound so low it rattled the teeth in the guards' skulls. From the mist of the road leading to the forest, a figure emerged. It was a woman. Her blue velvet dress was torn at the hem and stained with mud and black ichor. Her hair, usually a messy braid, floated around her head as if she were under water, defying gravity. But it was her eyes that made the guards freeze. They were glowing with a violent, pulsating violet light. On her shoulder sat a gray parrot, looking battered but smug, puffing his chest out like a tiny general. "Halt!" the first guard stammered, lowering his halberd. His hands were shaking. "State your business. The city is closed until—" Elsie didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. She kept walking, her boots making no sound on the cobblestones. "I said, halt!" the guard yelled, panic rising in his voice. He stepped forward to block her path. Elsie raised a single finger. She didn't look at the guard. She looked through him toward the high towers of the castle in the distance. Boom. An invisible wave of force slammed into the heavy iron-reinforced wooden gate. The seasoned oak, which had withstood siege engines and battering rams for 100 years, shattered. It didn't break, it exploded inward, turning into splinters and dust in a microsecond. The guards were thrown backward, landing hard in the dirt, gasping for air. They weren't hurt, but they were paralyzed by a fear so primal it locked their muscles. Elsie walked through the ruined archway. "Make way for the witch!" Squeaky shrieked, his voice amplified by the magic swirling around her mistress. "She's had a bad night, and she's out of tea!" The commotion drew the attention of the city watch.
A dozen armored men rushed into the street, swords drawn. "Stop her! She's attacking the city!" Elsie stopped. She turned her glowing violet gaze upon the line of soldiers. She tilted her head, and the air around her crackled with ozone. Stones from the street began to lift into the air, hovering menacingly. "I am not here for the city," Elsie's voice echoed, layered and distorted, sounding like a goddess speaking from the bottom of a well. "I am here for the rat in the castle. Stand aside or I will unmake you." The sergeant looked at the floating stones. He looked at the shattered gate. He looked at the woman who radiated enough power to level a mountain. "Stand down," the sergeant whispered, dropping his sword. "Let her pass. By the gods, let her pass." The soldiers parted like the Red Sea. Elsie continued her march toward the keep, her eyes fixed on the highest tower. The people of Eldoria peeked out from their windows, watching in terrified awe as the witch walked to judgment. She was no longer hiding. The seal was broken, and she was going to burn the lies out of the king's court, even if she had to burn the court down to do it.
Chapter 14. The Court of Lies. Inside the throne room, the atmosphere was suffocating. King Alaric paced back and forth in front of the dais, his boots wearing a groove into the stone floor. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. His wolf was near the surface, clawing at his mind, demanding to hunt. "She is gone, Alaric," Lady Genevieve said softly. She sat on a velvet stool near the fire, looking the picture of concern. "The guards saw her take the wagon. She fled south. She stole the emerald pendant from my chambers and ran." "Elsie is not a thief," Alaric growled, turning on her. His golden eyes were bloodshot. "She scolded me for wasting grain. She yelled at warlords. Does that sound like a woman who steals trinkets?" "People surprise you," Genevieve sighed, sipping her tea. "She was a commoner. The temptation of gold, it is powerful for those who have nothing. Perhaps she was overwhelmed by her duties." "I sent trackers," Alaric muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Why can they not find her scent? It vanishes at the city edge." "Because she likely used a masking potion," Genevieve lied smoothly. "She is a witch, is she not? A hedge witch, but still capable of trickery." Alaric slammed his fist into a stone pillar, a crack spider-webbed through the granite. "I should have been there. I should have protected her." "You are the king." Genevieve stood up, walking to him. Her touch was cool and possessive. "You cannot protect everyone, especially those who do not wish to be kept. Forget her, Alaric. Focus on your duty. Focus on us." Alaric looked at her. For a moment, he felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe Genevieve was right. Maybe Elsie had played him. Maybe the connection he felt was just a delusion of a lonely beast. Crash. The massive double doors of the throne room, bound in iron and oak, were blasted off their hinges. They flew across the room, smashing into the far wall with the force of a catapult shot. Dust and debris filled the air. The guards drew their swords, forming a protective ring around the king. Genevieve shrieked, cowering behind Alaric. Through the dust, a silhouette walked in. "You have terrible taste in women, Your Grace," a voice rang out. It was familiar, but changed. It held a power that made the stained glass windows vibrate. Elsie stepped into the light. Her dress was ruined, her skin smeared with dirt, but she looked like a queen of the underworld. Her eyes blazed violet. Squeaky sat on her shoulder, glaring at Genevieve. "Elsie," Alaric breathed, his heart stopping. He pushed past the guards, ignoring their protests. "You came back." "I never left," Elsie said, grossly. She pointed a glowing finger at Genevieve. "Ask her where I was, Alaric. Ask your duty where she sent me." Genevieve's face went pale. She stepped out from behind Alaric, trying to regain her composure. "Guards, seize her. She is the thief. Look at her. She is using dark magic." The guards hesitated. They looked at the king. "She drugged me," Elsie continued, walking closer.
The guards parted for her, terrified of the energy radiating from her skin. She had her men drag me to the enchanted forest. She left me for the nether beasts. She wanted me eaten. Alaric went still. The temperature in the room dropped. He turned slowly to look at Genevieve. Is this true? She lies, Genevieve screamed, her voice shrill. She is a monster. Look at her eyes. She is a chaos witch. She is a threat to the kingdom. The only threat here, Elsie stopped 10 feet from the throne, is you. Kill her, Genevieve ordered the guards. I command you. No one moves, Alaric roared. His alpha command slammed into the room, freezing everyone in place. He looked at Elsie, really looked at her. He saw the power, yes, but he also saw the bruises on her wrists. He saw the way she stood, protecting Squeaky. He looked at Genevieve. He saw the fear in her eyes, not fear of a monster, but fear of exposure. You tried to kill my mate, Alaric whispered. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't admitted it to himself until now. Elsie was his mate, and Genevieve had tried to feed her to the wolves. Alaric, listen to me, Genevieve pleaded, backing away. She is an abomination. I did it for the bloodline, for purity. Purity? Elsie laughed. It was a dark, hollow sound. You talk of purity, High Priestess? You who murder rivals in the dark? Elsie raised her hand. The violet light flared, blindingly bright. You wanted a wolf so badly, Genevieve? You wanted the power of the pack? Elsie's voice thundered. Then take it.
Chapter 15. The Wolf and the Witch. The magic that erupted from Elsie was not a beam or a bolt. It was a cloud of shimmering, violet smoke that rushed across the throne room floor like a living thing. It swirled around Genevieve, trapping her in a vortex of chaos. "No, stop!" Genevieve screamed, clawing at her throat. "Alaric, help me!" Alaric stood back. He watched with grim satisfaction. He crossed his arms over his chest. You wished for nature to take its course, Genevieve. This seems natural. Please, Genevieve wailed. Elsie clenched her fist. By the blood of the North and the chaos in my veins, I curse you. The violet smoke tightened. Genevieve fell to her knees. Then the screaming changed. It morphed into a guttural, wet, tearing sound. Her pristine silk dress ripped as her body began to contort. Bones cracked and reshaped with sickening pops loud enough to echo in the vaulted ceiling. Her hands elongated, fingers fusing into paws. Her golden hair turned into coarse white fur. Her nose pushed out into a snout. It wasn't the majestic shift of a Lycan. This was painful, forced, and wrong. It was a punishment. Within seconds, the High Priestess was gone. In her place, crouching on the stone floor, was a white wolf. But it wasn't a noble dire wolf like the king. It was smaller, its eyes wide with human terror. The wolf opened its mouth to speak, to beg, but all that came out was a pathetic yelp. Yip! The courtroom was deadly silent. Elsie lowered her hand. The amethyst glow in her eyes faded back to hazel, though she looked exhausted, swaying slightly on her feet. She will never shift back, Elsie said, her voice hoarse. She retains her mind. She knows who she is. She knows what she lost, but she will never speak a lie again. She will never order a death again. She is a wolf, bound to the silence of the beast. Squeaky flew from Elsie's shoulder and landed on the floor in front of the trembling white wolf. "Who is a good girl?" Squeaky asked, mockingly. "Not you. Bad dog, bad dog." The wolf whimpered and scurried under a table, tail between its legs. Alaric walked toward Elsie. The guards lowered their swords, sensing the violence was over. The king stopped in front of her. He reached out, hesitating for a moment, before cupping her face in his large, warm hands. "You are chaos," he whispered, looking into her eyes. "You are half frostblood. I can smell it now that the seal is broken." Elsie flinched, expecting rejection. The Frostbloods were his enemies. Her uncle was a warlord. "I am," she admitted, her chin trembling. "Are you going to imprison me? Execute me?" Alaric ran his thumb over her cheek, wiping away a smudge of dirt.
I should, he murmured. By the laws of the kingdom, you are a threat. You are a weapon of the enemy. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. But you are also the woman who scolded me for not drinking my tea. You are the woman who saved my arm. You are the woman who walked through hell to come back to me. He kissed her forehead, a soft, lingering kiss that sealed a promise. Let the North come, Alaric said, loud enough for his court to hear. Let the warlords come. I have a witch queen now, and God have mercy on anyone who tries to take her from me. Elsie's legs finally gave out. The adrenaline crash hit her at once. She didn't hit the floor. Alaric caught her, scooping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Rest now, Elsie, he whispered into her hair. The praying can wait until morning. As he carried her out of the throne room, Squeaky flew above them, circling triumphantly. That went well, the parrot squawked to the stunned nobles. Now who has a cracker? I'm starving. But the peace was fragile. Far to the north, in the frozen peaks of the Grim Peak Mountains, a warlord sat on a throne of bone. He held a crystal orb in his hand, watching the events in the throne room unfold. Warlord Roderick smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. So, my niece has finally awakened. Prepare the legions. We march for Eldoria. The war had begun.
Chapter 16. Waking the Dragon. Elsie woke to the smell of cedar, wood smoke, and male musk. It was a stark contrast to the scent of dried herbs and dust she was used to in her tower. The sheets beneath her were silk, not linen, and the mattress was soft enough to swallow her whole. She blinked her eyes open, panic flaring for a brief second. Where am I? Then the memories of the previous night crashed down on her like a rock slide. The enchanted forest, the nether bear, Squeaky dying and coming back, the throne room, Genevieve turning into a wolf. Elsie sat up abruptly, clutching the sheets to her chest. She wasn't in the tower, she was in the royal suite. The room was massive, dominated by a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. Tapestries depicting the history of the Lycan kings hung on the stone walls, and heavy velvet curtains blocked out the morning sun. You slept for 14 hours, a deep voice rumbled from the corner. Elsie jumped. King Alaric was sitting in a high-backed leather chair near the fire. He was reading a scroll, a mug of steaming calf resting on his knee. He looked tired but alert, his gaze scanning her face with a predator's intensity that made her skin prickle. 14 hours? Elsie croaked. Her throat felt raw, a side effect of channeling so much chaos magic. Your body isn't used to the power, Alaric said, setting the scroll aside. He stood up and walked toward the bed. He moved with a predator's grace, but his expression was gentle. The royal physician, well, the new one, says you nearly burned your own nerves away. Elsie looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly. The binding runes on her chest were gone, leaving only faint, silvery scars. The heat was still there, buzzing under her skin like a hive of bees, but it was manageable now. The court, Elsie whispered, looking up at him. They saw everything. They know what I am. They know you are powerful, Alaric corrected, sitting on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. And they are terrified. Half the council wants you exiled, the other half wants you studied. And what do you want? Elsie asked, her voice small. She braced herself for rejection. She was a chaos witch, a walking disaster. Alaric reached out, his rough, calloused fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. I want to know if you take sugar in your tea. Elsie blinked, stunned. What? Tea, Alaric repeated, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. I ordered a tray, but I realized I don't know how you drink it. I know how to lead armies, I know how to hunt, but I don't know how my mate takes her tea. The word hung in the air. Mate. Elsie's breath hitched. You can't mean that. Alaric, look at me. I turned a high priestess into a dog. I dissolved a bear. My magic it's wrong. It's chaotic. Chaos is just order that hasn't been understood yet, Alaric said firmly.
He leaned in closer, his golden eyes locking onto hers. Genevieve tried to kill you. You defended yourself. You defended us. I do not fear your storm, Elsie. I have spent my life surrounded by people who bow and scrape. You are the only one who stands. I'm dangerous, she insisted, tears pricking her eyes. So am I, Alaric countered. He took her hand and placed it on his chest, over his heart. We are both monsters in the eyes of the sheep. Perhaps it is time the monsters stuck together. Before Elsie could argue, a gray blur flew out from behind the heavy curtains. "Breakfast! Breakfast!" Squeaky shrieked, diving onto the bed. He looked remarkably healthy for a bird that had been dead the day before. He hopped onto Alaric's knee and looked him in the eye. "Hey, Bigfoot, where's the fruit? I was promised melon." Alaric sighed, the tension breaking. The bird lives, unfortunately. Elsie laughed, a wet, choking sound of relief. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against Alaric's chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, anchoring her to the world. "Honey," Elsie whispered into his tunic, "I take my tea with honey."
Chapter 17. The Baker's Daughter. News of the Witch Queen had spread through Eldoria faster than a plague. By the time Elsie worked up the courage to leave the keep, the atmosphere in the castle had shifted. Servants didn't just bow, they scrambled out of her way, pressing themselves against walls, eyes wide with terror. Knights, who used to wink at her, now gripped their sword hilts nervously. It was lonely. "They think I'm gonna turn them into newts," Elsie muttered, walking through the lower courtyard. Squeaky was riding on her shoulder, eating a stolen grape. "To be fair, the cook does look like a toad already," Squeaky commented. "You'd be doing him a favor." Elsie ignored him and headed for the service gate. She needed normalcy. She needed the one person who knew her before the magic, before the king, before the chaos. She found Sarah in the royal bakery, elbow deep in dough. The air smelled of yeast and warm sugar, a comforting blanket of domesticity. Sarah was a year younger than Elsie, with cheeks round as apples and hair the color of wheat. When Elsie walked in, the other bakers froze. The head baker dropped a tray of tarts. Sarah looked up. She saw the glowing storm flecks in Elsie's eyes. She saw the terrified staff. She saw the power radiating off her friend like heat from an oven. Sarah wiped her floury hands on her apron and walked straight up to Elsie. "You're late," Sarah said sternly. Elsie blinked. "What?" "You promised to taste the lemon cakes yesterday." Sarah crossed her arms. "I saved you 3. They're stale now." Elsie felt a lump form in her throat. "Sarah, did you hear about the throne room?" "Hard not to." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Stable boy told the scullery maid, who told the laundress, who told me. Apparently, you turned the high priestess into a poodle?" "A wolf," Elsie corrected weakly. "A small, non-threatening wolf." "Right, a wolf," Sarah nodded. Then, without warning, she pulled Elsie into a bone-crushing hug. "You idiot! I thought you were dead. When the wagon came back empty, I thought she killed you." Elsie melted into the hug, clutching Sarah's flour-dusted apron. "I almost was, but the magic broke out." "I always knew there was something weird about you." Sarah pulled back, grinning. She reached up and poked Squeaky on the beak. "And this demon bird coming back to life? That's new." "I am immortal," Squeaky declared. "Bow before Squeaky the Undying." "Shut up, chicken." Sarah broke off a piece of a baguette and shoved it into the parrot's beak. She looked back at Elsie, her expression sobering. "Elsie, the people are scared. They're saying you're a sorceress from the dark legends. They're saying you've bewitched the king." "I haven't bewitched anyone," Elsie said defensively. He likes me, I think." "He looked at you like you were the only water in the desert before you went glowing purple," Sarah laughed. "But listen to me. Be careful. The council hates magic, and the church, they're already preaching sermons about the witch in the tower." "Let them preach," Elsie said, a flash of her new confidence surfacing. "I'm done hiding, Sarah. I'm done being the hedge witch in the corner."
Sarah looked at her friend, really looked at the new strength in her jaw, the way she held herself. "Okay," Sarah smiled softly. "Just remember, even powerful witch queens need muffins. Don't forget the little people." "Never," Elsie promised. "You're my sister, Sarah, in every way that matters." "Good." Sarah grabbed a fresh tray of pastries. "Now, help me ice these, or are you too royal for manual labor?" Elsie laughed, grabbing a piping bag. For an hour, amidst the flour and sugar, she wasn't a monster or a queen. She was just Elsie. But outside the bakery windows, the sky was darkening to the north, and the wind was carrying a scent that made Squeaky shiver in his sleep.
Chapter 18. The Frost Blood Truth. That evening, the mood in the King's solar was grim. Alaric stood over the strategic map table, moving wooden markers with aggressive shoves. Sir Garrick and 3 other trusted advisors stood in silence. Elsie entered the room quietly. She had changed into a clean gown of dark green wool, practical but regal. "Leave us," Alaric commanded the advisors without looking up. The men bowed and filed out, casting wary glances at Elsie. When the door clicked shut, Alaric looked at her. "My scouts report movement in the Grim Peak Mountains," Alaric said, his voice heavy. "The Frostblood clan is gathering. They haven't mobilized like this in 20 years, not since the Great Purge." Elsie felt the blood drain from her face. She walked to the table and looked at the map. The Grim Peaks were a jagged scar of white ink at the top of the parchment. "They aren't just gathering," Elsie whispered, her finger tracing the mountain range. "They are coming for me." Alaric frowned. "Because you are a witch? They hate magic. They usually kill witches on sight." "Not this time." Elsie took a deep breath. It was time. No more secrets. "Alaric, do you know who my father was?" "A merchant, you said. Died of the pox." "I lied." Elsie looked him in the eye. "My mother was the witch. She fled the north because she fell in love with a wolf, a beta of the Frostblood clan." Alaric went very still. The Frostbloods do not mix with outsiders, and they certainly do not mix with magic users. "My father was different," Elsie said, her voice trembling. "He tried to protect us, but his brother found out. His brother killed him in front of us. My mother bound my magic, and we ran south to Eldoria to hide in the city of our enemy's enemy." Alaric gripped the edge of the table. "His brother? Who is your uncle, Elsie?" Elsie closed her eyes. "Warlord Roderick." The name hit the room like a physical blow. Alaric exhaled sharply, his knuckles turning white. Roderick was the butcher of the north. He was the only alpha who rivaled Alaric in strength and cruelty. He had raided the northern borders of Eldoria for a decade. "Roderick is your uncle," Alaric repeated, processing the information. "You have the blood of the frost wolf in you." "And the blood of a chaos witch," Elsie added. "My mother told me, Roderick didn't just want to kill us, he wanted me. The legends of the clan speak of a storm-born child, a weapon. He believes if he controls me, he can use my magic to break the walls of Eldoria." Alaric stared at her. The implications were terrifying. His mate was the niece of his mortal enemy and a living weapon of mass destruction. The council would demand her head immediately if they knew. "Does anyone else know?" Alaric asked, his voice low. "Only my mother, and she is dead, and now you." Alaric walked around the table. He stopped in front of her. He looked angry, but not at her. He was angry at the world that had hunted her. "He is coming for you," Alaric stated the fact. "He saw your magic flare. He knows you are here." "I will leave," Elsie said quickly, stepping back. "I won't bring war to your doorstep, Alaric. If I go into the wastes—" "Silence," Alaric growled. He grabbed her shoulders, pulling her to him. "You do not run. You are my mate. You are the queen of Eldoria. If Roderick wants you, he will have to climb over a mountain of his own dead to get to you." "He'll burn the city," Elsie whispered. "Then we will burn him first," Alaric vowed, his eyes burning with fierce, possessive fire. "Let him come. I have been waiting for a reason to kill Roderick for years.
Now he has given me the best reason of all." He kissed her then, hard, desperate, and full of promises. It was a kiss of war. Outside the window, a snowflake drifted down from the sky, then another. It was the middle of summer, but snow was falling on Eldoria. The North had arrived.
Chapter 19. The Winter in Summer. The snow did not fall like ordinary snow. It did not drift lazily on the breeze. It drove downward like iron filings, heavy and wet, sticking to the warm cobblestones of Eldoria until the heat of the summer sun was strangled out of the stone. By noon, the city was covered in 3 inches of white powder. The temperature had plummeted 40 degrees. In the lower quarters, where the poor lived in drafty wooden shacks, panic was beginning to set in. People were burning furniture to stay warm. The crops in the surrounding valleys, wheat and barley ready for harvest, were being crushed under the unnatural weight of the ice. Inside the war room, the temperature was even colder, though for different reasons. Elsie stood at Alaric's right hand. She wore a heavy cloak of black fur over her green dress, a gift from the king's own wardrobe. Squeaky was shivering on her shoulder, buried so deep in her hair that only his beak was visible. "This is sorcery," Lord Drayton spat, pointing a gloved finger at the map table. "Roderick is a brute, but he is not a mage. He cannot summon a blizzard in July." "He cannot," Elsie said, her voice cutting through the grumbling of the assembled warlords. "He has shamans. The Frostblood clan enslaves hedge witches and drains them to power their totems. This isn't weather, Lord Drayton. It's a siege weapon." "And you would know, wouldn't you?" Drayton sneered, turning his eyes on her. "The outsider, the chaos witch. We have heard the rumors of your bloodline. Perhaps you summoned this storm to signal your kin." Alaric's growl was low and vibrating, shaking the heavy oak table. "Careful, Drayton. You speak to your queen." "I speak to a threat," Drayton shouted, slamming his hand down. "Look at the window, Alaric. The people are freezing. We are facing the full might of the North because of her. I say we give him what he wants. Hand over the girl and the ice melts. We save the kingdom." A murmur of agreement rippled through half the council. Self-preservation was a powerful motivator, and fear of the Frostbloods ran deep. Elsie felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She looked at the faces of these men sworn to protect the realm, and saw only calculation. They would trade her life for a warm harvest without a second thought. She stepped forward, moving out of Alaric's protective shadow. The binding runes were gone, and with them, her inhibition. "You think giving me to him will stop this?" Elsie asked, her voice steady. "Roderick killed his own brother for power. Do you think he will spare you because you handed over a hostage? If you give me to him, he will use my blood to fuel a storm that will bury this castle in a mile of ice. He doesn't want peace, Drayton. He wants extinction." She raised her hand. Violet energy flickered between her fingers, casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. "I am the only thing standing between you and that ice," Elsie declared, her eyes glowing faintly. "I can counter his shamans. I can hold the heat. Throw me to the wolves if you wish, but know that you will freeze before my body hits the ground." Silence descended on the room. Squeaky popped his head out of her hair. "Yeah," the bird squawked, "and she'll turn you all into poodles, ugly ones." Alaric looked at Elsie, pride swelling in his chest. She wasn't cowering, she was leading. "You heard her," Alaric said, his voice final. "We do not negotiate with terrorists, and we do not trade queens. General Garrick, double the guard on the northern wall. Mages, report to Elsie. She commands the magical defense." Drayton looked furious, his face turning a mottled red, but he bowed stiffly. "As you command, sire, but when the walls fall, remember who brought the winter." As the council filed out, Alaric turned to Elsie. He took her cold hands in his. "That was brave," he whispered. "That was terrifying," Elsie admitted, her knees shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Alaric, can I actually stop a weather totem? I've never done it." "You dissolved a nether bear," Alaric smiled grimly. "I have faith in you. Just try not to dissolve the castle while you're at it." Chapter 20. The Wolf in the Kennel. Before she could attend to the magical defenses, Elsie had unfinished business. A nagging feeling in her gut drew her down into the bowels of the castle, past the dungeons, to the royal kennels. The air here smelled of damp straw, wet fur, and misery. The royal hounds, massive, well-trained beasts used for hunting, paced in their spacious pens, but Elsie walked past them to the solitary enclosure at the far end, usually reserved for sick animals. Curled in the corner on a pile of rags lay a white wolf. It was small compared to the dire wolves of the north, with delicate paws and fur that had once been pristine but was now matted with dirt. Elsie stopped at the bars. Squeaky tightened his grip on her shoulder, hissing, "Bad dog, evil dog." The white wolf lifted its head. Its eyes were not the yellow of a beast, but a piercing, icy blue. Human eyes. They widened when they saw Elsie, filling with a mix of hate and pathetic pleading. "Hello, Genevieve," Elsie said softly. The wolf whimpered. It tried to stand, its movements awkward and stiff, as if the human mind inside couldn't quite figure out how to work the four legs. It came to the bars, letting out a low, whining yip. "Change me back," the eyes seemed to scream. "Please." "I can't," Elsie answered the unspoken plea. "Even if I wanted to. Chaos magic, it breaks things, it changes them, it doesn't undo." She looked at the creature that had tried to feed her to a monster. She should feel satisfied. This woman had drugged her, kidnapped her, and ordered her death. Justice had been served. But Elsie didn't feel triumphant. She felt sad. She saw the cost of power, the cost of vengeance. "You wanted to rule through fear," Elsie whispered, reaching into her pocket. She pulled out a strip of dried venison jerky she had swiped from the kitchens. "And now you are afraid of everything. It's a lonely way to live." She tossed the meat through the bars. Genevieve flinched, then stared at the food. Her human pride warred with her animal hunger. After a moment, the hunger won. She snatched the meat up, chewing frantically. "Look at her," Squeaky muttered, eating off the floor. "No silk dresses now, huh?" "Be quiet, Squeaky," Elsie scolded gently. "Cruelty for cruelty's sake makes us no better than Roderick." Elsie knelt, looking the wolf in the eye. "I won't let them starve you, and I won't let them beat you. You are safe here, Genevieve, which is more than you offered me." The wolf stopped chewing. It looked at Elsie with something new, confusion, perhaps even shame. It lowered its head, tucking its tail between its legs, and backed into the shadows. "Elsie?" Alaric's voice came from the kennel entrance. He walked toward her, his boots silent on the straw. He looked at the white wolf with cold indifference, then at Elsie with warmth. "Are you feeding her?" Alaric asked, raising an eyebrow. "He's an enemy." Elsie stood up, brushing straw from her dress. "But he's a living thing, and I am not a torturer, Alaric." Alaric pulled her into his side, kissing the top of her head. "No, you are not. That is why you are worthy of the crown, and she never was." Suddenly, a horn blew from the ramparts above. It wasn't the deep, mournful horn of the watch. It was the frantic, staccato blast of an alarm. "Attack!" the voice bellowed from the courtyard. "The north gate! They're breaching!" Alaric's body grew rigid. The alpha took over. "Roderick is early." "He's testing us," Elsie said, her eyes beginning to glow violet again. "He wants to see what I can do." "Then let's show him," Alaric growled, his hand going to the hilt of his sword. "Come, my queen, it's time to go to war." Chapter 21. The First Wave. The north gate of Eldoria was a marvel of engineering, 50 feet of iron-reinforced oak and stone. But as Elsie and Alaric raced onto the ramparts, they saw that engineering was useless against magic. The blizzard had intensified. Visibility was near zero. Out of the swirling white wall of snow, massive shapes were emerging. "Ice golems!" Sir Garrick shouted, pointing his sword over the battlements. "Archers, fire arrows, aim for the joints!" Below, 3 lumbering giants made of solid glacial ice were hammering against the gate.
Each was 20 feet tall, crude but devastatingly strong. They swung clubs made of frozen pine trunks, each blow shaking the foundations of the castle. Boom! The gate groaned. Splinters the size of spears flew inward. The wood was freezing, becoming brittle under the magical assault. "Arrows do nothing!" a captain yelled. The flaming arrows hissed and went out the moment they touched the golem's ice skin. "They are powered by runes," Elsie shouted over the wind, squinting against the snow. She could see the faint blue glow of magic pulsating in the center of the golem's chests. "Shamans are controlling them from the tree line." "Can you stop them?" Alaric yelled, drawing his greatsword. "If that gate breaks, the outer city falls." "I don't need to stop them," Elsie said, climbing onto a gargoyle perch. The wind whipped her hair violently, but she didn't flinch. She closed her eyes. She reached out with her senses, ignoring the cold, ignoring the screaming soldiers. She felt the ley lines of magic stretching from the golems back into the forest, thin silver threads of control. "Squeaky, cover me," Elsie ordered. "On it, boss!" Squeaky took flight, not towards the giants, but buzzing around Elsie's head, shrieking at any stray arrows that flew their way. Elsie opened her eyes. They were blazing violet searchlights. She thrust both hands forward. "Sever!" she screamed. A ripple of chaos magic, jagged purple lightning shot from her hands. It didn't hit the golems, it sliced through the air above them, cutting the invisible silver threads connecting them to their masters. The effect was instant. The leading golem, mid-swing, suddenly stopped. The blue light in its chest flickered and died. Without the magic holding the unnatural ice together, gravity took over. With a sound like a collapsing glacier, the 20-foot giant shattered. Tons of ice crashed down, crushing the battering ram it was holding. The soldiers on the wall cheered. "One down!" Garrick roared. "Two to go!" But the other two golems didn't stop. The shamans in the woods had adapted quickly, reinforcing the connection. The second golem slammed its shoulder into the gate. Crack! The massive timber beam holding the gate shut snapped. The doors burst open. "They've breached!" Alaric roared. "Defenders, to the courtyard! Hold the line!" Alaric leapt. He didn't take the stairs. He vaulted over the 40-foot wall, shifting in midair. His body contorted, clothes ripping, black fur bursting forth. By the time he hit the ground, he was a massive, black dire wolf, snarling with lethal fury. He landed on top of the first Frostblood warrior rushing through the broken gate. Elsie watched from above, terror gripping her heart. The breach was open, the golems were stepping through, and her king was down there, a singular point of darkness in a sea of white ice. "No," Elsie whispered, "not today." She didn't aim at the golems this time. She aimed at the ground beneath them. She poured every ounce of her chaos into the earth. The cobblestones in the gateway began to glow purple. Then they liquefied. The solid ground turned into a churning vortex of magical quicksand. The second golem took a step and sank to its waist. It roared, a sound of grinding ice, thrashing as the earth swallowed it. Elsie fell to her knees, nose bleeding. The magic was taking its toll. But she looked down and saw Alaric, the black wolf, look up at her. He gave a sharp bark of approval before tearing the throat out of an enemy raider. The first wave had breached, but the witch and the wolf were holding the line. For now.
Chapter 22. Blood on the Snow. The silence that followed the battle was heavier than the noise of war. The screams of the dying Frostblood raiders had faded, leaving only the crackling of torches and the wet sound of melting ice. In the courtyard of the North Gate, the carnage was absolute. The massive ice golem that Elsie had trapped in the liquefied earth was now just a jagged, frozen statue protruding from the cobblestones. Black ichor, the blood of the corrupted Northmen, stained the pristine white snow that continued to fall relentlessly. Elsie slid down from the gargoyle perch, her legs shaking so badly she nearly collapsed. She wiped the blood from her nose with the back of her sleeve. Using chaos magic on that scale felt like running a marathon while holding her breath. It drained the very marrow of her bones.
Alaric? She called out, scanning the bodies. A movement near the ruined gate caught her eye. The massive black wolf, which had been tearing through the enemy lines with lethal precision, was gone. In its place, a man knelt in the snow. Alaric was shifting back. It was a brutal, visceral process. Bones snapped and realigned, fur retreated into skin, and muscle reshaped itself. He crouched on one knee, naked and shivering, steam rising from his overheated body into the frigid air. He was covered in blood, none of it his own. Elsie ran to him. She didn't care about the gore. She stripped off her heavy fur cloak as she ran. "Alaric!" She reached him, throwing the warm fur over his broad, scarred shoulders. He looked up. His eyes were still flashing between human gold and wolf amber, the beast slowly receding. He looked exhausted, older than he had that morning. "The gate," Alec rasped, his voice rough. "Is it holding?" "The golems are down," Elsie whispered, dropping to her knees to wrap her arms around him, pulling the cloak tight to preserve his body heat. "The raiders pulled back when the giants fell. We held them, Alaric. We held." Alaric leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. This was just the probe. Roderick sent the pawns. He wanted to see if you would fight. "I fought," Elsie said fierce, though her voice trembled. "I sank a giant." "I saw." Alaric let out a low, dry chuckle. He opened his eyes, looking at her with an intensity that melted the ice in her veins. "My queen of chaos, you were magnificent and terrifying." "Hey, I helped," Squeaky fluttered down, landing on Alaric's head. The parrot was missing a tail feather, but he looked smug. "I pecked a guy in the ear. He cried like a baby." "You were very brave, Squeaky." Elsie smiled weakly, reaching up to stroke the bird. "Sire," Sir Garrick came running through the slush, his armor dented and bloodied. He stopped, averting his eyes respectfully from his naked king. "The perimeter is secure. We have 20 dead, 40 wounded. The healers are overwhelmed." Alaric stood up, wrapping the cloak around his waist like a kilt. The transformation from vulnerable man to commanding king was instant. "Take the wounded to the Great Hall. It's warmer there. And get the masons to shore up the gate with stone and timber. If they breach again, we fight in the streets." "Yes, sire." Garrick hesitated. "And the prisoners?" Alaric's face hardened. "The Frostbloods do not surrender, Garrick. If any are alive, they are only waiting for a chance to kill you. Put them to the sword." Elsie flinched. It was a harsh command, brutal and unforgiving. But looking at the devastation around them, she swallowed her protest. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was war against a warlord who used people as batteries. "Come." Alaric put his arm around Elsie, pulling her into his side for warmth. As they walked back towards the keep, Elsie looked back at the frozen golem. The snow was falling harder now, burying the dead. She realized with a sinking heart that the hardest part wasn't the fighting, it was the waiting for the next blow.
Chapter 23. The Heart of the Storm. The war room was freezing. The magical winter outside had seeped through the thick stone walls, turning the castle into an icebox. Maps were curling at the edges, and the breath of the councilmen misted in the air. "It's getting colder," Lord Drayton complained, rubbing his gloved hands together. "The fires are doing nothing. If the temperature drops another 10 degrees, the water in the cisterns will freeze. We will die of thirst before the enemy even enters the keep." Elsie stood by the fire, but Drayton was right. It offered no heat. This was magical cold. It gnawed at the soul. "It's a totem," Elsie said, turning to face the table. Squeaky was perched on the back of Alaric's chair, looking miserable and puffed up against the chill. "I can feel it. There's a pulse coming from the whispering woods, a heartbeat of ice magic." "Roderick has established a forward command," Alaric said, tracing a line on the map. "He is shielding his army with this storm. We cannot see them, but they can see us." "We need to destroy the source." Sir Garrick slammed a fist onto the table. "A sortie, a small group of knights. We ride out, find the shaman, kill him, and break the storm." "It's suicide," Drayton scoffed. "Riding into that blizzard blind, you'll freeze to death in an hour, or be picked off by shadow stalkers."
I won't be blind, Elsie said softly. The room went quiet. Alaric stiffened. Elsie, no, he warned, his voice low. I can see the ley lines, Alaric, Elsie argued, walking to the map. She placed her finger on a dense patch of forest about 2 miles from the gate. I can see the thread connecting the storm to its source. It's here, in the old ruins. You are not going out there, Alaric stood up, looming over the table. You are the target. If Roderick captures you, if I stay here, we freeze, Elsie shouted back. The stress was fraying her nerves. We are sitting ducks, Alaric. Drayton is right about one thing. We can't outlast this. We have to strike. She's right, Squeaky chimed in, shivering. Even my beak is freezing, and I'm from the tropics. I wasn't built for this popsicle nonsense. Alaric looked at Elsie. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same amethyst fire that had obliterated the bear. He wanted to lock her in the safest room in the castle. He wanted to wrap her in furs and never let her go. But he was a king, and a king knew that sometimes the queen was the most powerful piece on the board. I will lead the sortie, Alaric decided, his voice grim. Garrick, gather 10 of your best men. No heavy armor, it will just freeze to your skin. Leather and fur. And me, Elsie added. And you, Alaric conceded, though it clearly pained him. But you stay glued to my side. If a snowflake so much as looks at you wrong, I will shred it. Deal, Elsie nodded. We leave at dusk. Use the storm against them. They won't expect us to attack in this weather. As the council dispersed to prepare, Alaric walked around the table and pulled Elsie into a crushing hug. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent of ozone and lavender. I hate this, he whispered against her skin. I know, but we're going to win. We have to. For the kingdom? Alaric asked. No, Elsie pulled back, looking into his golden eyes, because I promised Sarah I'd taste her lemon cakes tomorrow, and I never break a promise to my best friend. Alaric managed a small smile. Lemon cakes, a worthy cause for war. But as he kissed her, Elsie felt a tremor in his hands. The alpha was afraid, not for himself, but for her. And deep down, Elsie knew that tonight something was going to break. She just prayed it wasn't them.
Chapter 24. Bread and Bandages. Before the sunset, or rather, before the gray sky darkened to black, Elsie made her way to the Great Hall. It had been converted into a triage center. The long tables where nobles usually feasted were now covered in wounded soldiers. The smell of blood, sickness, and unwashed bodies was overwhelming, but cutting through it all was the scent of fresh bread. Sarah was moving between the cots like an angel in a flour-stained apron. She carried a basket of warm rolls, handing them out to groaning men, wiping brows, and whispering words of comfort. Elsie watched her friend for a moment, her heart aching. Sarah wasn't a warrior, she wasn't a witch, she was just good. In a world of monsters and magic, Sarah was fiercely, stubbornly human. You should be in the cellars, Elsie said, walking up behind her. Sarah jumped, nearly dropping her basket. Gosh, Elsie, stop sneaking up on people. You're getting too good at that ninja witch thing. The cellars are safer, Elsie insisted, grabbing Sarah's arm. The walls are thicker, it's warmer. And who will feed these men? Sarah gestured to the hall. The cooks are hiding under their beds. Someone has to make sure the defenders don't starve. Sarah, please. Elsie's voice cracked. Alaric and I are going out, into the woods. If the walls fall while we're gone. If the walls fall, the cellars won't save me, Sarah said gently. She placed her hand over Elsie's. Her palm was warm and rough with flour. Elsie, look at me. You fight with lightning. Alaric fights with claws. I fight with bread and bandages. That is my post. I am not abandoning it. Elsie bit her lip to stop the tears. You're too brave for your own good. And you're too bossy, Sarah smiled, tucking a stray lock of hair behind Elsie's ear. Go, save the world, kill the bad guy, come back and eat cake. Pinky promise? Elsie held out her little finger, a childish gesture they had done since they were 5 years old. Sarah laughed, hooking her pinky around Elsie's.
Pinky promise. Now go, before I make you cry and I get snot on the bread. Elsie hugged her tight, squeezing her eyes shut to memorize the feeling of Sarah's warmth. I love you, Sarah. Love you too, Witchy, Sarah whispered. Elsie pulled away and turned to leave. Squeaky, who had been sitting quietly on Elsie's shoulder, turned his head back. Bye-bye, bread girl, the parrot squawked softly. It wasn't his usual mockery. It sounded strangely sad. Elsie walked out of the great hall, her resolve hardening into diamond. She would destroy the totem. She would end the storm. She would make the world safe for Sarah. She didn't know that she would never see her friend alive again. As Elsie left, a faint greenish gas began to seep under the heavy wooden doors at the far end of the hall. It was odorless, silent, and heavier than air. It crept along the floor, swirling around the legs of the cots. Sarah bent down to pick up a dropped bandage. She frowned, seeing the strange mist curling around her ankles. That's odd, she whispered. Outside, the horn blew. The second wave had begun, and this time Roderick hadn't sent giants. He had sent alchemy.
Chapter 25. The Walk of Shadows. The forest was a graveyard of ice. The ancient pines of the whispering woods, usually murmuring with the wind, were silent, encased in thick sheaths of rime. The only sound was the crunch of boots breaking the frozen crust of the snow and the labored breathing of the 10 knights following their king. Elsie walked beside Alaric, her hand gripped tight in his. She wasn't cold. Alaric was radiating heat like a furnace, his alpha metabolism burning in overdrive to keep them both alive. But the magical chill tried to press in, a physical weight pushing against her mental shields. Keep your eyes up, Alaric whispered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. The snow hides things. I can see the lines, Elsie murmured back. Her eyes were glowing a faint, steady violet, illuminating the swirling flakes in front of them. The ley line is thick here, pulsating. It feels sick, like an infection. Squeaky sees nothing, Squeaky complained from inside Alaric's cloak, where he had burrowed for warmth. Just white and more white. I hate the north. Quiet, Alaric hissed. He stopped abruptly, raising a fist. The column of knights halted instantly, crouching in the snow, hands on sword hilts. What is it? Sir Garrick whispered, creeping up to Alaric's left. Silence. Alaric tilted his head, his wolf ears twitching. He sniffed the air. The blizzard masked scents, but it couldn't mask the sound of a heartbeat to an alpha. We are not alone. Elsie looked into the trees. To the naked eye there was nothing but shadows and drifting snow, but with her witch sight she saw them, distortions in the air, rips in the fabric of the light. Shadow stalkers, Elsie breathed, her blood running cold. 12 of them, in the trees. They are cloaked. As soon as the words left her mouth, the shadows moved. A blur of motion dropped from the branches. A creature that looked like a man made of smoke and knives landed on the knight at the rear of the column. There was no scream, just a wet gurgle as a jagged obsidian blade found the gap in the knight's leather armor. Ambush! Garrick roared. Light them up, Elsie! Alaric shouted, drawing his great sword in a blurred arc. He swung at empty air, but his blade connected with something solid, spraying black blood onto the snow. A stalker materialized, screeching as it died. Elsie threw her hands out. She didn't use a beam of destruction. She used a flare. Lux Eterna! A supernova of amethyst light exploded from her body. It didn't hurt the knights, but it stripped away the magical camouflage of the stalkers. Suddenly, the 12 assassins were visible, gaunt, pale creatures with hollow eyes and serrated blades. For Eldoria! Alaric bellowed, lunging forward. The melee was chaotic and brutal. In the tight confines of the frozen forest, long swords clashed against obsidian daggers. Alaric was a whirlwind of violence, moving faster than humanly possible. He didn't shift, the cold would freeze his wolf form too quickly, but he fought with the savagery of the beast. He caught a stalker's wrist, snapped the bone, and drove his own knee into its chest, collapsing its ribcage. Elsie wasn't idle.
A stalker lunged for her, its blade aiming for her throat. Squeaky popped out of the cloak and shrieked, "Not today, ugly!" diving at the creature's face. The distraction gave Elsie a second. She clenched her fist. The snow beneath the stalker's feet turned to steam instantly, scalding it. As it screamed, she blasted it backward with a pulse of force, pinning it against a tree with enough force to crack the trunk. "Move!" Alaric ordered, grabbing Elsie's arm as the last stalker fell to Garrick's blade. "They were sent to delay us. The shaman knows we are coming." They left the dead knight in the snow, there was no time for burials, and pushed deeper into the woods. The violet light of the ley line was getting brighter, throbbing like a toxic vein in the earth. They were close.
Chapter 26. The Totem of Bone. The old ruins were a place of superstition even before the war. It was an ancient circle of standing stones from a civilization that predated the Lycans, a place where the barrier between the mortal world and the spirit realm was thin. Now it was the eye of the storm. Elsie and Alaric broke through the tree line and stopped. In the center of the stone circle stood a totem. It was a grotesque structure, 15 feet high, constructed from frozen mammoth tusks, human skulls, and shards of blue glacial ice. Green witch fire burned at its peak, spiraling up into the clouds to feed the blizzard. Standing at the base of the totem was the shaman. He was a withered, hunched figure, wrapped in tattered gray furs, his face hidden behind a mask made from a wolf's skull. He held a staff topped with a shrunken head. "The Chaos Child," the shaman's voice rasped, amplified by the wind. "And the Mongrel King. You are late. The ritual is complete." "End it," Alaric growled, stepping into the circle. "Call off the storm, and I will grant you a quick death." The shaman laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Death? I am already dead, King. I gave my soul to the frost gods to power this storm. You cannot kill what has no life." He slammed his staff into the ground. The snow around the totem erupted. Skeletons, ancient warriors buried in the ruins, clawed their way out of the frozen earth, their bones encased in magical ice armor. "Garrick, handle the bones," Alaric commanded. "Elsie, the totem, destroy it." "On it!" Elsie sprinted forward. The undead warriors charged. Garrick and his knights met them with a clash of steel. Alaric stayed close to Elsie, his greatsword hacking through rib cages and skulls to clear a path for her. Elsie reached the inner circle. The cold here was absolute zero. It burned her lungs. The green fire of the totem lashed out at her like a whip. "Shield!" Elsie screamed. A bubble of violet energy formed around her, deflecting the green fire. She looked at the totem. She could see the anchor point, a large, pulsating black ruby embedded in the central skull. "It's the gem!" Elsie yelled to Alaric. "I need to shatter it." "Do it!" Alaric shouted, decapitating a skeleton. "I'll hold them off." Elsie planted her feet. She didn't want to just break it. She wanted to obliterate it. She drew on the chaos. She thought of the freezing people in the city. She thought of Sarah in the cold hall. She thought of Genevieve in the cage. "By the blood of the storm," Elsie whispered. She thrust both hands forward, fingers hooked like claws. A beam of concentrated chaos magic, dark purple laced with black lightning, erupted from her arms. It hit the totem with the force of a freight train. The shaman screamed as the backlash hit him. "No, it cannot be broken. It is bound by blood." "My blood is stronger," Elsie roared. She pushed harder. The violet light consumed the green fire. Cracks appeared in the ice. The black ruby began to fracture. Crack! With a sound like the world snapping in two, the totem exploded. Shards of ice and bone flew everywhere. The green fire vanished instantly.
Above them, the swirling vortex of clouds stalled. The heavy snowfall stopped as if a tap had been turned off. A shaft of moonlight broke through the gloom, illuminating the ruins. The skeletons collapsed into piles of inanimate dust. The shaman fell to his knees, his mask cracking in half. Alaric walked up to him, his sword dripping. "It is over." The shaman looked up, blood leaking from his mouth. But he wasn't crying, he was smiling. "Over?" the shaman wheezed. "Foolish king, look behind you. The storm was not the weapon, it was the curtain." Elsie turned. Through the break in the clouds, she could see the distant silhouette of Eldoria. The storm had lifted, yes, but rising from the castle was not the white of snow, but the sickly, thick green plume of alchemical gas. And on the wind, clear as a bell in the sudden silence, came the sound of screaming. The distraction worked, the shaman whispered, and died. Elsie's heart stopped. "Sarah!"
Chapter 27. The Silent Death. While the king and the witch fought in the woods, the great hall of Eldoria had become a tomb. Sarah was the first to notice the smell. It wasn't the metallic tang of blood or the sour stench of sickness. It smelt like almonds and rotten eggs. She stood up from the cot where she had been bandaging a young squire's leg. She looked toward the heavy double doors at the far end of the hall. A thick, verdant mist was seeping underneath the wood, curling along the stone floor like a seeking serpent. "Gas!" Sarah screamed, her voice cutting through the groans of the wounded. "Everyone up! Cover your mouths! Get to the upper levels!" But it was too late for many. The gas was heavy, hugging the floor where the most critically wounded lay on low pallets. As the mist touched them, they didn't scream. They simply convulsed once, their eyes rolling back, and went still. "Move!" Sarah grabbed the young squire, hauling him to his feet. "Don't breathe it. Use your tunic." Panic erupted. Those who could walk scrambled for the rear exits, trampling over the slower ones. The knights guarding the doors tried to open them, but the gas was thickest there. They collapsed, clutching their throats, foam bubbling from their lips. Sarah coughed, her eyes stinging. The gas was rising. It was waist-high now. "The windows!" Sarah yelled. "Break the windows!" She grabbed a heavy iron candelabra and swung it with all her might. The stained glass shattered, letting in a blast of freezing air. The wind helped disperse the gas slightly near the wall, creating a pocket of breathable air. "Here, come here," she waved to the survivors. She was helping an elderly cook climb onto the window ledge when the doors to the hall banged open. These were not golems. These were not mindless beasts. 6 figures strode into the gas-filled hall. They wore sleek masks made of leather and glass that covered their faces, protecting them from the poison. They wore the white furs of the Frostblood elite guard. "Leave none alive," the leader commanded, his voice muffled by the mask. They moved methodically, walking through the dying men, slitting throats to ensure death. Sarah froze. She was perched on the window ledge. She could jump. It was a 20-foot drop into a snowbank, but she would survive. She could run. But then she heard a cry. A little girl, the daughter of a laundress who had been helping distribute water, was cowering under a table in the center of the room. The gas was creeping up her legs. A Frostblood soldier was walking toward her, raising a spear. Sarah didn't think. She didn't calculate. She jumped down from the window ledge. "Hey!" Sarah screamed, hurling the iron candelabra at the soldier. It clanged off his helmet, staggering him. "Pick on someone of your own size, you coward!" The soldier turned. He looked at the little girl in the flour-stained apron. He laughed. "Run, Lily!" Sarah shouted to the child. "Run to the window!" The little girl scrambled up and out the window Sarah had broken. She was safe, but Sarah was not. The 6 soldiers surrounded her. The gas was chest-high now. Sarah coughed, her lungs burning. She backed up until she hit the stone wall. She held up a small paring knife, her bread knife, her hands shaking violently. "My best friend is the queen, and she is going to turn you all into worms."
The leader stepped forward. He didn't attack her. He looked at her apron. He looked at her defiance. "Take her," the leader said coldly. "The warlord wants leverage. If we cannot catch the witch, we catch the heart." He lunged. Sarah slashed with her knife, cutting his arm, but he backhanded her with a gauntleted fist. The world exploded in white light. Sarah fell into the gas. She held her breath, praying, as rough hands grabbed her hair and dragged her into the darkness. "Elsie," she thought as consciousness faded, "don't come for me. It's a trap."
Chapter 28. The Empty Apron. The ride back to the castle was a blur of terrified horses and stinging wind, but as Elsie and Alaric breached the city walls, the wind died. The magical blizzard had ceased with the destruction of the totem, leaving the air still, cold, and heavy with a terrifying silence. They didn't need to ask where the attack had happened. The green smog had dissipated, blown away by the wind from the broken windows, but the stench of sulfur and death hung over the great hall like a shroud. Elsie slid off her horse before it had even fully stopped. Her legs hit the cobblestones, jarring her bones, but she didn't feel it. She ran. She ran past the guards who were weeping openly. She ran past the bodies of knights who had died, clawing at their throats near the doors. "Sarah!" Elsie screamed, her voice echoing in the vaulted ceiling of the hall. "Sarah!" There was no answer, only the sound of dripping water from melted ice and the soft, ragged coughing of the few survivors huddled near the ventilation shafts. Elsie tore through the room. She checked every face. She turned over bodies of soldiers, terrified she would see golden hair and round cheeks. She saw the old cook, dead by the hearth. She saw the young squire, lifeless near the water barrels. "Elsie." Alaric was behind her, his voice low and pained. He had smelled the air. He knew who was here and who wasn't. "She's not here," Elsie gasped, spinning around. Her eyes were wide, frantic, the amethyst light sputtering erratically. She pinky promised she would be safe." A small movement caught her eye near the shattered west window. A little girl, no older than 7, was curled up in a ball beneath a heavy oak table, shivering violently. Elsie rushed over, falling to her knees. "Lily? Lily, where is she? Where is Sarah?" The child looked up, her face streaked with soot and tears. She pointed to the window ledge. "The bad men," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "They had glass faces. Sarah, she threw the candle. She told me to run." Elsie looked at the window. On the stone floor beneath it lay a small, serrated paring knife. Beside it was a white apron, dusted with flour and trampled by heavy, muddy boots. Elsie picked up the apron. It was cold. It smelled of yeast and fear. "They took her?" Elsie asked, her voice barely a sound. Lily nodded. "The big man, he hit her. They dragged her into the dark. She said you would turn them into worms." The world tilted on its axis. Elsie clutched the dirty apron to her chest, burying her face in the fabric. A scream built in her throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, but it never came out. Instead, the air in the great hall suddenly dropped 20 degrees. The torches on the walls flared amethyst. Alaric knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her shaking shoulders. "We will find her, Elsie. If I have to burn the entire north, we will find her." Elsie pulled back. Her face was dry. She wasn't crying. Her eyes were two voids of absolute, terrifying purple. "They didn't kill her," Elsie said, her voice devoid of humanity. "That was their mistake." She stood up, still clutching the apron. The grief was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp purpose. Roderick hadn't just taken a hostage. He had taken the only thing that kept Elsie's humanity anchored. "Squeaky," Elsie said to the bird perched silently on Alaric's shoulder. "Yes, boss?" Squeaky whispered, sensing the mood. "Hunt them," Elsie commanded. "Hunt them down." Chapter 29. The Warlord's Demand. An hour later, the council was gathered in the war room. The mood was funereal. The attack on the Great Hall had cost them 50 souls, including 3 of Alaric's best knights. But the blow to morale was far worse. The castle, their sanctuary, had been breached. Elsie stood at the head of the table, staring at the map. She hadn't changed her clothes. She still wore her travel leathers, and Sarah's apron was tied around her waist like a sash of war. A rider approached the gate, Sir Garrick announced, entering the room. He looked sick. He didn't speak, he just dropped this. Garrick placed a heavy iron box on the table. It was carved with the sigil of the Frostblood clan, a wolf's skull encased in ice. "Open it," Alaric ordered. Garrick flipped the latch. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was not a head, but a lock of golden hair tied with a blue ribbon. Beside it was a scroll made of human skin. Elsie reached out, her hand trembling, and touched the hair. It was Sarah's. Alaric picked up the scroll and unrolled it. He read it aloud, his voice growing deeper and more guttural with every word. "To the mongrel king and the chaos witch, you broke my totem. Impressive, but storms are easily rebuilt. Hearts are not. I have the baker. She screams prettily. She will last perhaps 2 days before the cold takes her. If you wish to see her alive, the witch must surrender herself to my camp at the base of Grim Peak by sunrise tomorrow, alone, unarmed. If you bring an army, the girl dies. If you use magic, the girl dies. If you are late, I will send her back to you in pieces. Your uncle, Roderick." Alaric crushed the scroll in his fist, the parchment crumbling to dust. "He is baiting a trap. If you go, he kills you both." "If I don't go, she dies," Elsie said. She wasn't yelling. She was calm. It was the calm of a person walking to the gallows. "Elsie, no!" Alaric grabbed her arm. "We can launch a rescue. We can track them." "By sunrise?" Elsie looked at him. "His camp is miles away, Alaric. You said it yourself. He wants me, not Sarah. She is just collateral." "You are the queen," Lord Drayton shouted, though for once he looked terrified rather than arrogant. "If you surrender, he gains your power. He will destroy us all." "I am not going there to surrender, Drayton." Elsie turned her glowing eyes on him. "I am going there to finish it." "You cannot walk into a warlord's camp alone," Alaric roared, the alpha losing control. He stepped between her and the door. "I forbid it. I will not lose you." "You don't have a choice," Elsie whispered. She touched the apron at her waist. "I pinky promised, Alaric. I promised I'd come back for cake." She pulled away from him. "I need to prepare." "Elsie!" Alaric shouted as she walked out. She didn't stop. She went straight to her tower. She didn't pack clothes. She packed vials of volatile alchemical fire. She packed nightshade. She packed raw iron. Squeaky landed on the table, watching her. "Suicide mission?" the bird asked quietly. "Rescue mission," Elsie corrected, strapping a dagger to her thigh. "Same thing," Squeaky sighed. "I'll pack the snacks." Elsie looked out the window at the distant fires of the Frostblood camp. They twinkled like stars in the black night. Somewhere out there, Sarah was cold and afraid. "Hold on, Sarah," Elsie whispered to the wind. "I'm coming." Chapter 30. The Prayer. The moon was high when Elsie tried to slip out of the postern gate. She moved like a shadow, cloaked in a spell of silence. The guards didn't see her, the dogs didn't bark. But as she reached the heavy iron door leading to the moat, a figure stepped out of the darkness. It wasn't a guard. It was Alaric. He wasn't wearing his crown. He wasn't wearing his armor. He was wearing travel leathers and a cloak with 2 massive broadswords strapped to his back. "You think you can sneak past a wolf in his own den?" Alaric asked softly. Elsie froze. "Alaric, move, I have to go." "I know." Alaric nodded. He stepped closer. "But the note said you must come alone. It didn't say you couldn't bring a pet." Elsie blinked. "What?" "I am not your king tonight, Elsie." Alaric reached out, cupping her face. His thumbs traced the dark circles under her eyes. "I am your mate. Where you go, I go. If you walk into fire, I burn with you." "He will kill you," Elsie sobbed, her resolve finally cracking. She leaned into his touch, tears spilling over. "He wants me. If he sees you—" "He expects a king leading an army. He does not expect a husband protecting his wife. We go together, Elsie, or we don't go at all." He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, fierce, and consuming. It was a vow sealed in breath and blood. It grounded her chaos, pulling her back from the edge of the void she had been staring into. When they broke apart, Alaric rested his forehead against hers. "You refused to bow to me once," he reminded her, a sad smile playing on his lips. "And I told you to pray to me." "I remember," Elsie sniffled. "Well," Alaric dropped to one knee in the snow. He, the king of Eldoria, the unbroken alpha, knelt before the baker's daughter turned witch queen. He took her hand and pressed it to his forehead. "I pray to you, Elsie," Alaric whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Grant me the strength to keep you safe. Lead me into the dark, and I will be your shield." Elsie looked down at him. Her heart, which had been frozen since she found the apron, finally beat again. She wasn't alone. She had her wolf. "Get up, you heavy oaf," she whispered, pulling him to his feet. She wiped her eyes. The violet fire returned, but this time it was controlled, focused. "We have a warlord to kill." "And a baker to save," Alaric added, drawing his swords. Elsie turned to the door. She blasted the lock with a flick of her finger. The heavy iron swung open, revealing the frozen wasteland beyond. Far in the distance, the grim peak mountain loomed like a jagged tooth. "Squisky!" Elsie called out. The parrot flew down from the battlements, landing on her shoulder. "Present! I brought walnuts and violets." "Let's go." Elsie stepped out into the snow. Part 1 was over. The hiding was done. The defending was done. Now they marched to war, and as the three of them disappeared into the blizzard, the first rays of a blood-red sun began to crest the horizon. End of Part 1.
Part 2. The War of Frost and Blood. Chapter 31. Into the Mouth of the Wolf. The trek to the base of Grim Peak was a journey through a white hell. The blizzard that Elsie had broken at the ruins had been replaced by the natural, brutal winter of the high north. The wind here didn't just blow, it stripped the heat from the body like a thief peeling an orange. Elsie trudged through waist-deep snowdrifts, her legs burning with exertion. She was wrapped in 3 layers of wool and fur, but the cold still found its way in, gnawing at her bones. The only thing keeping her moving was the warm, steady grip of Alaric's hand on her arm and the burning violet ember of rage deep in her chest. "We are close." Alaric's voice was a low rumble against her ear. He moved with eerie silence for such a large man, his boots finding purchase on the ice where hers slipped. He wasn't wearing his crown or his royal sigils. He was dressed as a mercenary, face obscured by a heavy scarf, only his golden eyes visible. "How close?" Elsie wheezed, her breath misting in the air. "I can smell the fires," Alaric whispered, "and the latrines. An army this size leaves a stench even the snow cannot hide." "Delightful," Squeaky muttered from inside Elsie's hood. The parrot was huddled against her neck, vibrating with warmth. "I demand a vacation after this, somewhere with coconuts and 0 snow." They crested a ridge of black rock and stopped dead. Below them, spread out across the frozen valley floor, lay the Frostblood war camp. It was massive. Thousands of tents made from gray animal skins stretched for miles. In the center, a fortress of timber and bone was being constructed, a siege engine of terrifying proportions. Smoke rose from hundreds of campfires, choking the pristine mountain air with smog. "There are 10,000 of them," Alaric calculated, his eyes narrowing. "At least. Roderick has united the clans." "How do we get in?" Elsie asked, staring at the sea of enemies. "We can't fight 10,000 men." "We don't fight," Alaric said. pulling her down behind the rocks as a patrol of wolf riders passed below. We flow, like water. He pointed to a supply train lumbering toward the camp's western perimeter. Massive wagons pulled by woolly rhinos, piled high with timber and raided grain. "We are resupplying," Alaric whispered. "We hitch a ride." They slid down the back of the ridge, moving through the shadows of the pine trees. When the supply train slowed to navigate a particularly deep drift, Alaric moved. He grabbed the back of the last wagon, vaulted up, and pulled Elsie after him. They landed silently on a pile of rough-hewn logs. Alaric immediately pulled a tarp over them, plunging them into darkness. "Cozy," Squeaky said. "Smells like pine pitch and desperation." Elsie huddled against Alaric. In the dark, his presence was overwhelming. He wasn't just a king here. He was her protector, her partner. "If we find her, how do we get out? We can't sneak 3 people out on a wagon." "We cross that bridge when we burn it," Alaric murmured, kissing her forehead. "Focus on your magic, Elsie. Keep it tight. If they sense the chaos, every shaman in that camp will know we are here." Elsie closed her eyes, visualizing the violet fire in her blood. She imagined packing it into a small lead box, locking it tight. She had to be small. She had to be nothing. The wagon lurched forward, passing under the crude wooden arch of the camp gate. The sounds of the enemy washed over them, guttural shouts in the northern tongue, the sharpening of steel, the howling of wolves. They were inside.
Chapter 32. The City of Bone. The Frost Blood Camp was a city of nightmares. Peering through a slit in the canvas tarp, Elsie saw things that made her stomach turn. There were cages everywhere, not for animals, but for people. Villagers captured in border raids huddled together for warmth, their eyes hollow. But worse were the battery cages. Elsie saw a line of wooden stakes driven into the frozen ground. Bound to them were women, witches. They looked drained, their skin gray, their heads lolling. Frost blood shamans stood over them, siphoning their magic into glowing blue crystals to power the camp's heating totems. "Monsters," Elsie breathed, her hand gripping the hilt of her dagger until her knuckles turned white. "They're using them as firewood." "That is Roderick's way," Alaric whispered, his jaw tight. "He consumes, he does not build." The wagon jerked to a halt near the center of the camp. "Out," Alaric commanded softly. They slipped out the back while the drivers were arguing with a quartermaster. They moved into the shadows between the tents, moving deeper into the belly of the beast. The central command tent was unmistakable. It wasn't made of canvas. It was made of the stitched-together hides of white dire wolves and supported by the ribs of a whale. A banner with the frozen skull sigil snapped in the wind above it. "That's where he is," Elsie said, feeling a magnetic pull toward the structure. "And that's where she is." "There are 4 guards at the entrance, elites. We can't take them silently." "We don't need the front door," Squeaky chirped softly. He hopped onto Elsie's shoulder. "I see a vent. Top of the tent. Smoke hole." "You can't fit through a smoke hole, Alaric," Elsie whispered. "No," Alaric agreed, "but Squeaky can, and you can if you use a little chaos." Elsie looked at him. "Levitation? Can you do it without flaring?" "I have to," Elsie nodded. They circled to the back of the massive tent. The noise of the camp was deafening here. Drums were beating a rhythmic war chant. Alaric laced his fingers together, creating a step. "Up you go," he whispered. Elsie stepped into his hands and he boosted her high. She grabbed the ridge of the whalebone frame. It was slippery with ice. She hauled herself up, flattening her body against the roof. She crawled to the smoke hole. The heat billowing out smelled of roasted meat and incense. She peered down. The interior was lavish in a barbaric way. Furs covered every inch of the floor. In the center, a massive iron brazier burned. And there, tied to a wooden chair near the fire, was Sarah.
She looked terrible. Her face was bruised, her lips split, her apron was gone, replaced by a rough woolen shift. But she was alive. Her head was up and she was glaring at the man pacing in front of her. "He's there," Elsie whispered down to Alaric. "Roderick." She couldn't see his face clearly, just a massive figure in plate armor adorned with black fur. He was holding Sarah's paring knife, toying with it. "Elsie," Squeaky whispered in her ear, "look at the floor." Elsie squinted. Painted on the furs in what looked like fresh blood was a massive, intricate rune circle. Sarah wasn't just a hostage, she was the center of a ritual. "It's a trap," Elsie realized, her heart hammering against her ribs. "He knows we're coming. He's waiting for me to step into the circle." She slid back down to Alaric. "It's a summoning circle. If I enter it, he'll trap my magic." Alaric drew his broadsword slowly, the steel singing softly in the cold air. "Then we don't use magic," he said, his eyes burning with the promise of violence. "Are you ready to meet your uncle?" "No," Elsie admitted, "but let's go say hello anyway."
Chapter 33. The Cost of a Promise. The inside of the command tent was silent, save for the crackling of the braziers. Elsie stood frozen, her dagger in hand, her eyes locked on the figure tied to the wooden chair in the center of the rune circle. "Sarah!" Elsie gasped, stepping forward. Sarah looked up. Her face was battered, her lip split, but her eyes were clear. When she saw Elsie, she didn't smile with relief. She looked terrified. "No," Sarah whispered, straining against the ropes. "Elsie, get out! He knew you would come." "How touching," a voice boomed from the shadows. Warlord Roderick stepped into the light. He was massive, his armor covered in frost, holding a jagged spear made of black iron. He stood behind Sarah's chair, his hand resting casually on her shoulder. "You kept your promise, niece," Roderick sneered, looking at Elsie and Alaric. "You came for the baker. Sentimental. Weak." "Let her go, Roderick," Alaric growled, his broadswords drawn. He stepped in front of Elsie, his body radiating lethal tension. "Your fight is with us." "My fight," corrected Roderick, "is with the world. And to wake the Titan, I need chaos. Pure, unadulterated, grieving chaos." He looked at Elsie. "I tried to draw it out with fear, but fear is fleeting. Grief? Grief is eternal." Elsie's heart stopped. She saw the malice in his eyes. She saw the tightening of his grip on the spear. "No!" Elsie screamed, lunging forward. "Take me! I surrender! Just don't—" "Elsie, run!" Sarah shouted, her voice breaking. She looked at her best friend, tears streaming down her bruised cheeks. "I love you, Witchy! I love—" Roderick didn't hesitate. With a brutal, efficient motion, he drove the black iron spear down. It passed through Sarah's chest. The sound was sickeningly wet. Sarah gasped, her eyes widening in shock. The light in them, the warmth, the humor, the stubborn kindness, flickered and vanished in an instant. Her head fell forward. The tent went silent. Elsie stopped mid-stride. She stared at the red stains spreading across the rough woolen shift. She stared at the limp hand of the girl who had shared her bread, her secrets, and her life since they were 5 years old. "There," Roderick said calmly, pulling the spear free and letting the body slump. He wiped the blade on Sarah's sleeve. "Now, let us see what you are really made of." Chapter 34. The Dark Phoenix. For a moment, Elsie felt nothing. The world had gone gray. The sound of the wind outside, the crackle of the fire, Alaric's roar of rage as he charged Roderick. It all sounded muffled, like she was underwater. Sarah is dead. The thought echoed in her mind, looping endlessly. The apron, the lemon cakes, the pinky promise. Dead. Something inside Elsie didn't just break, it evaporated. The binding runes, the self-control, the fear of her own power, it was all incinerated in a nanosecond. "Elsie!"
Alaric shouted, parrying a blow from Roderick's axe. "Get back!" Elsie didn't get back. She screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was a tear in the fabric of reality. "No!" The shockwave hit the tent like a nuclear blast. The whalebone structure didn't collapse. It disintegrated. The heavy hides turned to ash instantly. The iron braziers melted into slag. Roderick was thrown backward, skidding across the frozen ground. Alaric dug his swords into the earth to hold his ground, shielding his face from the blinding violet light erupting from his mate. Elsie floated upward. Her feet left the ground. Her hair turned white-hot, flowing around her like a corona of plasma. Her eyes were gone, replaced by two voids of absolute devouring darkness, rimmed with violet fire. She looked down at Sarah's body, still tied to the chair, untouched by the blast that had leveled everything else. "You took her." The voice that came from Elsie was a legion. It shook the mountain. "You took her from me." Elsie turned her gaze to Roderick, who was scrambling to his feet, looking at her with a mix of terror and triumph. "Yes!" Roderick yelled, raising his axe. "This is it! The Titan wakes! Give it to me!" "You want it?" Elsie whispered. She raised her hands. The sky above the camp turned black. Violet lightning arced down, striking the ground, vaporizing soldiers, tents, and siege engines. "Elsie, stop!" Alaric roared, shifting into his wolf form to withstand the pressure. He tried to get to her, but the energy radiating from her was a physical wall. She was becoming a singularity. She was unmaking the world. "Die," Elsie commanded. She didn't aim a beam. She simply expanded her aura. The ground beneath the Frostblood army turned to void. Men didn't scream. They simply ceased to exist. The Titan in the mountain below groaned, its ice melting, its power being sucked up into the vortex that was Elsie. She was going to kill Roderick. Then she was going to kill the army. Then she was going to kill the mountain. She wouldn't stop until the pain stopped. And the pain was infinite.
Chapter 35. The Anchor. The world was ending. The grim peak was shaking apart. The sky was falling. In the center of the maelstrom hung the entity that had been Elsie. She was drowning in the chaos, lost in the sweet, cold promise of total oblivion. If she destroyed everything, there would be no more grief. But a shadow moved through the fire. A massive black wolf forced its way through the violet storm. Its fur was singed, its skin bleeding from the sheer pressure of the magic, but it didn't stop. It pushed against the wind that could strip flesh from bone. Alaric shifted back to human form 10 feet away from her. He was naked, vulnerable, and bleeding. He fell to his knees, not from weakness, but from supplication. "Elsie!" he roared, his voice cracking. "Look at me!" The entity tilted its head. It didn't recognize him. It only saw another thing to unmake. "She wouldn't want this," Alaric shouted, crawling forward. The magic flayed his skin, but he ignored it. "Sarah wouldn't want you to become the monster." Elsie paused. The name, Sarah, caused a flicker in the violet fire. "You promised," Alaric whispered, reaching out a hand that was turning gray from the necrotic energy. "You promised to come back." He grabbed her ankle. The contact shocked her. It burned him, searing his palm, but he held on. He didn't pull her down, he anchored her. "Pray to me, Elsie," Alaric sobbed, looking up into her void eyes. "Please, pray to me. Come back to the mud. Come back to me." The void wavered. Elsie looked down. She saw the man she loved, dying just to hold on to her. She saw Sarah's body behind him, still and peaceful amidst the destruction. The promise. The memory of a small finger hooked around hers hit her like a physical blow. "Alaric?" The Legion voice fractured, sounding like a scared girl. "I'm here," Alaric promised. "I'm right here."
Elsie screamed again, but this time it was a scream of rejection. She pushed the chaos away. She shoved the Titan's power back into the earth. The violet fire imploded, rushing back into her chest. She fell. Alaric caught her. They collapsed together onto the frozen, scorched earth. The silence that followed was deafening. The Frostblood camp was gone, erased. Roderick lay nearby, alive but broken, stripped of his mind by the sheer proximity to the void. Elsie lay in Alaric's arms, gasping for air, her body trembling violently. She looked over Alaric's shoulder at the wooden chair. "She's gone, Alaric," Elsie whispered, her voice raw and broken. "I know," he whispered into her hair, his own tears falling. "I know, but we are here, and we will take her home." Around them, the snow began to fall again, covering the scars of the battlefield, burying the dead, but it could not bury the hole in the Queen's heart. The war was won, but the price had been paid in gold, the gold of a baker's hair.
The silence on the slopes of Grim Peak was absolute. The blizzard had died along with the Frostblood army, leaving the air still and biting cold. The snow was pristine white again, covering the scorch marks of Elsie's rage, but it could not cover the grief. Elsie sat in the snow, her back against a rock. She was wrapped in Alaric's heavy fur cloak, but she was shivering. Not from cold, the chaos magic had burned her nerves out, but from a deep, internal shock. A few feet away, Alaric was working. He had found a sled, one of the few pieces of wood that hadn't been vaporized, and was carefully wrapping Sarah's body in layers of canvas and velvet he had salvaged from the ruined command tent. He moved with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. He tied the ropes gently, ensuring she wouldn't shift during the descent. Squeaky sat on Sarah's chest as Alaric worked. The bird didn't make a sound. He didn't peck at the ropes. He just sat there, fluffed up against the cold, guarding the girl who used to feed him crusts. "It is done," Alaric whispered, standing up. He looked exhausted. His skin was gray where the necrotic magic had touched him, and he moved with a limp, but his eyes were steady when they landed on Elsie. He walked over to her and crouched down. "Elsie, we have to go." Elsie stared at the sled. "I can't take her back like this, Alaric. She hated the cold. She wanted a bakery with a big oven. She wanted to marry a miller's son." "I know," Alaric said, his voice thick. He took Elsie's hands. They were ice cold. "We cannot leave her here. We take her home. We give her the fire she deserves." He pulled Elsie to her feet. She swayed, grabbing his arm for support. She felt light, untethered, as if gravity had lost its hold on her. "What about him?" Elsie gestured vaguely to a lump in the snow nearby. Warlord Roderick was sitting there. He wasn't dead. He wasn't even bound. He was rocking back and forth, staring at his hands, drooling slightly. When Elsie had opened the void, she hadn't just erased his army, she had erased his mind. The sheer proximity to absolute nothingness had wiped him clean. He was a husk. "He comes too," Alaric said, grimly. "He does not get the mercy of freezing to death. He faces justice." Alaric harnessed himself to the sled. He refused to let Elsie pull it. He refused to shift into a wolf, fearing he might drop it on the slick ice. He pulled it as a man, dragging the weight of their tragedy down the mountain. Elsie walked beside the sled, her hand resting on the canvas shroud. Roderick shambled behind them like a confused dog, tethered by a rope to Alaric's belt. The descent took hours. The sun began to set, painting the snow in hues of violent orange and bruised purple. Every step was a battle against the desire to just lie down and stop moving. "I promised," Elsie whispered to the wind, her voice cracking. "I promised we'd eat cake." "We will," Alaric said, from the front, grit in his voice as he hauled the sled over a ridge. "We will eat it for her." Elsie looked at Squeaky, who was still perched on the sled, riding it down. The bird looked at her, his black bead eye shiny with something that looked like tears. "Bye-bye, bread girl," Squeaky whispered. It was the longest walk of Elsie's life. Chapter 37. The Ghost in the Apron. The return to Eldoria was not a triumph. It was a funeral procession of 3. When the sentries on the east gate saw them emerging from the tree line, the king dragging a sled, the queen walking like a ghost, and the broken warlord stumbling behind, they didn't cheer. The horn blew a mournful low note that echoed through the valley. The gates groaned open. Sir Garrick ran out to meet them, followed by a retinue of healers and guards. He stopped dead when he saw the sled. He saw the size of the wrapped form. He saw the king's face. "Sire?" Garrick asked, his voice trembling. "The baker?" Alaric didn't speak. He just nodded once, a sharp, jerky motion. Garrick closed his eyes for a second, then signaled the guards. "Take the sled. Gently. If you drop it, I'll have your heads." "No," Alaric growled, pushing the guards away. "I carried her down. I will carry her in." He unhitched the ropes and lifted Sarah's body in his arms. He carried her through the gates, past the silent, weeping crowds who had gathered. They had heard the rumors. They knew the price of their safety. Elsie walked behind him. She felt the eyes of the city on her. They looked at her with awe, with fear. They sensed the power radiating off her, the residual chaos that still crackled like static in the air. She wasn't just their queen anymore. She was the woman who had erased an army. But Elsie didn't feel powerful. She felt small. She reached into her pocket and clutched the dirty, flour-stained apron she had carried all the way to the mountain. They brought Sarah to the great hall. They laid her on a table in the center of the room, surrounded by candles. Alaric finally stepped back, wiping sweat and dirt from his brow. He turned to Elsie. "You need to rest," he said gently. "The healers need to check your magic levels. You are flickering, Elsie." "I have to tell him," Elsie whispered, looking at the door. "Tell who?" "Her father. The royal baker. He's in the kitchens. He thinks I went to save her. He thinks I brought her back." Alaric's face crumbled. "Elsie, you can't. Let Garrick do it." "No." Elsie straightened her spine. The violet fire in her eyes flared for a second, cold and sharp. "It is my promise. It is my burden." She turned and walked out of the hall, heading for the kitchens. Squeaky flew after her, landing on her shoulder. The kitchens were warm, smelling of yeast and sugar. The head baker, a large, jolly man named Thomas, was kneading dough. He looked up when Elsie entered, a hopeful smile lighting up his flour-dusted face. "Your Majesty," Thomas wiped his hands, Is she hungry? I made the lemon cakes, her favorites." Elsie stopped. She tried to speak, but her throat closed up. She walked forward and placed the dirty apron on the work table. Thomas looked at the apron. He looked at the bloodstains on the hem. He looked at Elsie's face. The hope died in his eyes, replaced by a ruinous understanding. "Oh," Thomas whispered. He touched the apron. "Oh, my girl." He collapsed onto a stool, burying his face in his hands. Elsie stood there, the most powerful witch in the world, utterly helpless against the sound of a father weeping for his child. She stood guard over his grief, wishing she could burn the memory out of her own mind, but knowing she had to keep it forever.
Chapter 38. The Funeral of Wheat and Gold. The field of sleep was crowded but silent. The entire city had turned out. They stood in rows, holding candles, their breath misting in the cool morning air. In the center of the stone platform lay Sarah. She was dressed in her finest Sunday dress, a pale yellow linen that matched her hair. Her hands were folded over her chest, holding a wooden spoon and a sprig of dried lavender. Elsie stood at the foot of the pyre. She was dry-eyed now. She had cried all her tears on the mountain. Now she was just a vessel for the ceremony. Alaric stood beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back, keeping her upright. He wore his formal blacks, but he had tied a strip of white cloth around his arm, the mourning band of a brother. "We gather," the high priest intoned, "to commit a daughter of Eldoria to the stars. She did not carry a sword, she did not cast a spell, but she fought with a heart larger than this mountain." The priest nodded to Elsie. It was time. Elsie stepped forward. She held a torch. The flame wasn't orange, it was violet, fueled by her own magic. "I made a pinky promise," Elsie whispered to the silent body. "I promised we'd eat cake. I broke it." She touched the torch to the wood. The fire caught instantly, roaring up to embrace the girl who had loved the warmth of the oven. The yellow dress caught, turning into gold sparks that floated up into the gray sky. "Look," a child in the front row whispered. From the smoke, the sparks didn't just vanish. Elsie used the last dregs of her control to shape them. For a brief second, the smoke formed the shape of a girl laughing, dancing in the wind, before dissipating into the ether. Squeaky, who had been sitting quietly on the headstone, took flight. He circled the pyre 3 times. He landed on Elsie's shoulder. In his beak, he held a single, perfect red feather plucked from his own tail. He dropped it into the flames. "For the brave," Squeaky croaked, his voice cracking. "Fly high, bread girl." Elsie turned away. She couldn't watch the fire anymore. She looked at the crowd. She saw Roderick's tower in the distance, where the broken warlord sat staring at nothing. She felt a hand on hers. Alaric. "She is at peace, Elsie," Alaric murmured. "She is warm." "And I am cold," Elsie whispered back. "I know." Alaric pulled her into his chest, shielding her from the heat of the fire and the cold of the world. "I will be your fire now." As the pyre burned down to embers, Elsie looked at the city she had saved. It was safe, it was whole, but the bakery would always be empty, and the lemon cakes would never taste the same again. The war was won, but the cost was carved into the queen's soul, a scar that no magic could ever heal. "Let's go home, Alaric," Elsie said, turning her back on the smoke. "I'm tired." "I've got you," Alaric promised, leading her away from the dead and back toward the living.
Chapter 39. The Ghosts in the Mirror. A week had passed since the funeral, but the physician's tower still felt cold. It wasn't the magical chill of the frostblood totems. It was the mundane, seeping cold of a stone room inhabited by a woman who had forgotten how to generate warmth. Elsie stood before her workbench. It was cluttered with dried herbs, mortars, and pestles, the tools of her old life. She reached for a jar of dried lavender. Her hands were shaking. As her fingers brushed the glass, a spark of violet electricity jumped from her skin. Crack! The jar didn't just break, it disintegrated into fine sand. The scent of lavender exploded into the room, choking and overpowering. Elsie flinched, pulling her hand back as if burned. She looked at the mirror hanging on the wall. The reflection staring back was gaunt. Her skin was pale. Huge, dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes, and her hair hung in limp, dark curtains. But it was her eyes that terrified her. The hazel was back, but deep in the iris, a faint violet ring pulsed like a dying star. "Stop it," she whispered to herself. "Just stop." "You're leaking again," a voice squawked from the windowsill. Squeaky was preening his feathers. He looked better, his broken wing was set in a splint, and he had regained some of his shine, though his usual manic energy was dampened. "You're leaking magic like a cracked pot, boss." "I know, Squeaky." Elsie leaned her forehead against the cool stone of the wall. "I can't turn it off. Ever since the mountain, the tap is stuck open. I feel like if I sneeze, I'll blow the roof off." The heavy oak door creaked open. Alaric entered. He wasn't wearing his crown or his armor. He wore a simple linen shirt and trousers, looking more like a man than a king. He carried a tray with a steaming bowl of stew and a loaf of bread. He paused when he saw the pile of glass sand on the workbench. He didn't comment on it. He simply set the tray down on the table. "You need to eat," Alaric said gently. "I'm not hungry."
Elsie didn't turn around. She couldn't look at him. Every time she looked at him, she saw the mountain. She saw Sarah's body. She saw the monster she had become to save him. Elsie, Alaric walked over to her. He didn't touch her. He had learned that sudden touches made her flinch with defensive magic. He stood close enough that she could feel his heat. You are hiding in here. The council is asking for the queen. The queen is a danger to the castle, Elsie whispered, looking at her hands. Alaric, I erased a man's mind. I ate a warlord's soul. I shouldn't be on a throne. I should be in a cage. You are not a monster, Alaric said firmly. He reached out slowly and took her hand. She tensed, waiting for the spark, but he held on. You are the Wolf King. I can take the blast, but I will not let you wither away in this tower. Sarah gave her life so you could live yours. Do not waste it. The mention of Sarah was a sharp pain, but it cut through the numbness. Elsie sobbed, gripping his shirt. I miss her, she choked out. I know, Alaric held her tighter. We carry her with us. Now come, eat the stew. It has carrots. Squeaky told me you like carrots. I hate carrots, Elsie laughed through her tears, a weak, rusty sound. Squeaky is a liar. I am an agent of chaos, Squeaky chirped. Eat your vegetables. Elsie wiped her face. For the first time in a week, the violet pulse in her eyes faded completely. She wasn't fixed, but she wasn't alone.
Chapter 40. The Silent Ward. The North Tower had been converted. It was no longer a green silo, but a prison ward, lined with lead and witch iron to dampen any lingering magic. It housed 2 prisoners, separated by a thick stone wall, but visible to visitors through reinforced viewing ports. Elsie walked down the corridor, her boots echoing on the stone. Alaric walked a step behind her, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, though there was no danger here. They stopped at the first cell. Inside, the white wolf, Genevieve, lay on a rug. When she saw Elsie, she didn't growl. She stood up, wagged her tail once, and pressed her nose against the bars. Her blue eyes were calm, devoid of the ambition and cruelty that had defined her human life. She is happy, Elsie whispered, reaching through the bars to scratch the wolf's ears. She forgot everything, the politics, the hatred. She's just a dog. It is a mercy, Alaric said, looking at his former betrothed with pity. Better than the alternative. They moved to the second cell. This one was different. There was no peace here. Warlord Roderick sat on the floor in the corner. He was alive, fed and cleaned by the guards, but he wasn't there. He was rocking back and forth, a rhythmic, ceaseless motion. His eyes were wide open, staring at something that wasn't in the room. His mouth moved constantly, forming silent words that made no sense. Elsie stared at him. This was the man who had murdered her father, the man who had killed Sarah, the man who had tried to freeze the world. Does he speak? Elsie asked the guard stationed at the door. Only nonsense, Your Majesty, the guard replied nervously. He talks about the purple dark. He talks about the mouth that eats. He screams at night. Elsie shivered. She knew what he saw. He saw the void she had opened. He saw the end of existence. When she had drained him, she hadn't just taken his magic, she had shown him the nothingness that waited beyond life. Is this justice, Alaric? Elsie asked, her voice trembling. Or is it cruelty? Alaric stepped up beside her, looking at the broken husk of the warlord. He killed an innocent girl to make a point, Elsie. He tried to enslave a titan, to enslave us. Death would have been quick. This is the weight of his own sins crushing him. Roderick suddenly stopped rocking. He turned his head slowly toward the door. His milky, blind eyes seemed to lock onto Elsie. The baker, Roderick rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on stone. Elsie recoiled as if slapped. She clutched Alaric's arm. He can't know, Elsie gasped. He's mad. The baker, Roderick whispered again, a drool of saliva running down his chin. Pinky promise, pinky promise. Let's go, Alaric said sharply, pulling Elsie away from the door.
He is echoing your pain, Elsie. He has no mind of his own. He is just reflecting the magic that broke him. Don't listen to him." Alaric dragged her down the hallway, away from the rasping voice. But as they descended the stairs, Elsie felt a cold knot in her stomach. Roderick was broken, yes, but the void had connected them. He was a living monument to her darkest moment, a reminder that the chaos inside her was capable of things far worse than death. "He stays in the tower," Elsie said, her voice hard as they reached the sunlight of the courtyard. "Done," Alaric promised.
Chapter 41. The Ring of Iron and Ash. The sun was setting over Eldoria, casting long shadows across the battlements. It was the golden hour, where the broken stones of the city walls looked almost beautiful, bathed in amber light. Elsie stood on the high rampart of the east gate, the exact spot where Alaric had jumped to fight the army. It was a place of war, but looking north, she could almost see the ghost of the mountain where she had left her heart. It was a place of trauma, but Elsie found herself drawn there. It was where the war had truly ended. "I thought I'd find you here," Alaric said. Elsie turned. He was walking toward her along the wall. The wind caught his black cloak, making it billow. He looked regal, but tired. The recovery from his broken ribs and the necrotic frost was slow, even for an alpha. "It's quiet up here," Elsie said, looking out over the valley. The scars of the siege engines were still visible in the grass, overgrown now with wildflowers. "I can think." Alaric joined her at the parapet. He rested his elbows on the stone, looking out. "We have to rebuild the wall. Masons are coming from the south next week." "Good," Elsie nodded. "Build it higher." Alaric turned to her. He reached into his pocket. He didn't look nervous like a boy in love. He looked solemn, like a man making a pact. "Elsie," he said quietly, "we skipped the courting. We skipped the dances and the flowers. We went straight to blood and war." "I think we skipped a few steps, yes." Elsie managed a small smile. "I don't have a mother's ring to give you," Alaric said, pulling a small object from his pocket. "The Frostbloods stole the crown jewels decades ago, and I didn't want to buy you a diamond. Diamonds are cold." He held out his hand. Sitting in his palm was a ring. It wasn't gold or silver. It was a band of black iron, heavy and rough. Set into the metal wasn't a gem, but a small polished piece of the geode from de Grimpeak, a stone that swirled with violet and gray, looking like a trapped storm. "It's witch iron," Elsie realized, touching it. "From the cage?" "Reforged," Alaric nodded. "And the stone is from the cave where we almost died. It's a reminder, Elsie. We are made of iron and storm. We are broken things that fit together." He took her left hand. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, which were still scarred from the battle. "I cannot promise you a life without pain," Alaric said, his voice thick with emotion. "I cannot promise that the nightmares will stop, but I promise you this: you will never face the dark alone again. I am your wolf. I am your shield. And if the void comes for you, I will jump in with you." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. The witch iron was cool against her skin, grounding her excess magic. "Elsie Hale," Alaric whispered, leaning his forehead against hers. "Will you marry me? Will you help me rule this broken, beautiful kingdom?" Elsie looked at the ring, a symbol of their trauma turned into strength. She thought of the bakery, empty and silent. She thought of the tower where she had hidden, and she thought of the man standing before her, who had loved her when she was a monster. "Yes," Elsie whispered. Tears spilled over, hot and healing. "Yes, you idiot wolf, I will." Alaric didn't cheer, he didn't spin her around. He simply wrapped his arms around her and held her, tight and desperate, as the sun dipped below the horizon. "Good," Squeaky's voice chirped from the top of the flagpole above them. "Now that that is settled, when is the cake? I was promised a feast." Elsie laughed, burying her face in Alaric's chest. The grief was still there, heavy and sharp, but for the first time, the future felt heavier, and that was enough. Chapter 42. The empty oven. The royal bakery had been closed for 2 weeks. A simple wooden sign hung on the door, closed for mourning. The windows were dark, and the chimney, usually puffing out fragrant smoke by dawn, was cold and lifeless. Elsie stood in front of the door, her hand hovering over the latch. She wasn't wearing her royal silks. She wore a simple linen dress and a white apron that felt far too clean. "You don't have to go in there, boss," Squeaky whispered from her shoulder. The parrot was surprisingly subdued, his feathers fluffed up against the morning chill. "It smells like sadness and stale yeast." "I have to," Elsie whispered. "The yeast starter. Sarah said it has to be fed every day or it dies. It's been 2 weeks, Squeaky. If the yeast starter dies, the bread dies. And if the bread dies—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. She pushed the door open. A bell jingle, a cheerful sound that felt jarringly wrong in the silence. The kitchen was exactly as Sarah had left it on the day of the attack. A bag of flour was spilled on the floor. A tray of unbaked loaves sat on the counter, now covered in blue mold. It was a frozen snapshot of a life interrupted. Elsie walked to the back, to the massive stone hearth. Sitting on a stool in the corner was Thomas, Sarah's father. He was staring at a cold oven, his large hands resting idly on his knees. He looked like he had aged 20 years. "Thomas?" Elsie said softly. The baker jumped, nearly knocking over a stack of mixing bowls. He looked at Elsie, his eyes red-rimmed. "Your Majesty? I didn't hear the bell." "Don't call me that," Elsie said, stepping into the room. She picked up a broom and started sweeping the spilled flour. "I'm just Elsie, and this floor is a disgrace." Thomas watched her for a moment, confusion warring with grief on his face. "Elsie, you shouldn't be sweeping. You're the queen. You have magic." "My magic breaks things. It doesn't bake bread. It doesn't clean floors. I need to do something with my hands, Thomas, please." Thomas let out a long, shuddering sigh. He stood up and took the broom from her. "You're sweeping against the grain. Sarah would have scolded you." Elsie let out a watery laugh. "She would have thrown a spoon at me." "She would have," Thomas agreed. A small, sad smile touched his lips. He leaned on the broom. "I was going to sell the place. I can't light the oven without her. She was the one who knew the temperature. I just needed the dough." "We can't sell it," Elsie said fiercely. "This was her dream. She wanted to feed the city." She walked over to the jar containing the yeast starter, the mother dough that had been in the family for generations. She opened the lid. It smelled sour, pungent, but alive. "It's still bubbling," Thomas muttered. "It's a stubborn thing." "Like her," Elsie whispered. She turned to the older man. "Teach me, Thomas. I can't run the bakery. I have a kingdom to accidentally set on fire, but I want to bake one batch, for her. Lemon cakes." Thomas looked at the queen, at the raw pain in her eyes that mirrored his own. He nodded slowly. "Apron up, Elsie," Thomas commanded, his voice finding a bit of its old strength. "And wash your hands. You have Warlord just on them." For the next 4 hours, there was no magic in the bakery. There was only flour, butter, lemon zest, and the rhythmic sound of a wooden spoon hitting a ceramic bowl. She made a mess. She dropped eggshells in the batter. She burned her thumb on the oven door. But when the cakes finally came out, golden and steaming, the smell filled the empty space, chasing away the cold. Squeaky hopped onto the counter and sniffed a cake. "Acceptable," he judged. "Needs more sugar, but acceptable." Elsie took a bite. It was tart, sweet, and warm. It tasted like memory. She cried as she ate it, sitting on the floury floor with Thomas, reclaiming the space not with magic, but with the simple, human act of breaking bread.
Chapter 43. The Council of Scars. The atmosphere in the council chamber was tense enough to snap a bowstring. The great oak table was crowded with lords, generals, and merchants, all of whom kept shooting nervous glances at the woman sitting at the king's right hand. Elsie sat in a high-backed chair, wearing a gown of dark green velvet. She looked composed, but her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her thumb tracing the rough iron of her engagement ring. "The northern question remains," Lord Drayton declared, standing up. He had survived the siege by hiding in his wine cellar, but his voice was as loud and arrogant as ever. The remnants of Roderick's army are scattered in the foothills. They are starving, leaderless, and dangerous. I propose we send the Wolf Knights to hunt them down, exterminate them before they regroup. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Fear was a powerful motivator, and the memory of the Titan's frost was still fresh. No, Alaric's voice cut through the murmur. He sat at the head of the table, his arms still in a sling, his face grim. We have had enough killing. The snow is already red, Drayton. I will not add more blood to it. With respect, sire, mercy is what allowed Roderick to gain power in the first place. These are savages. They worship frost and death. He turned his eyes to Elsie. Perhaps the Queen has an opinion. We all saw her efficiency on the battlefield. Surely she agrees that a threat should be eliminated entirely. The room went silent. Drayton was baiting her. He was reminding everyone that she was a living weapon, a woman who could erase existence. Elsie stood up. Squeaky, who had been sleeping on the back of her chair, woke up and glared at Drayton. I do have an opinion, Lord Drayton, Elsie said, her voice calm and steady. I walked through their camp. Do you know what I saw? I saw soldiers, yes, but I also saw children. I saw women who were terrified of Roderick. I saw men forced to fight or be fed to the wolves. She walked to the map on the wall. She placed her hand on the grim peak. You want me to be the monster you fear, Elsie continued, turning to face the room. You want me to unleash the void and wipe them out so you can sleep soundly, but I won't do it. Then what do you propose? Drayton challenged. We let them raid our villages? We offer them a choice. We send wagons, not with soldiers, but with bread. We offer amnesty to anyone who lays down their arms and swears loyalty to Eldoria. We integrate them. We put them to work rebuilding the walls they destroyed. You want to bring the enemy into our city? General Garrick asked, looking skeptical but respectful. I want to break the cycle, Elsie said firmly. Roderick ruled by fear. If we rule by fear, we are just Roderick with a better tailor. She looked Drayton in the eye. Her eyes flashed violet, just for a second. And as for my efficiency, Elsie lowered her voice, do not mistake my restraint for weakness, my lord. I choose mercy because I am strong enough to afford it. You choose slaughter because you are afraid. Drayton paled and sat down abruptly. Alaric looked at Elsie, a fierce pride burning in his eyes. He banged his good fist on the table. The Queen has spoken, Alaric declared. General Garrick, prepare the supply wagons. We go to the foothills. We bring them bread, not swords. Anyone who refuses can freeze in the waste, but anyone who wants a future comes with us. Yes, sire, Garrick bowed. As the council adjourned, Alaric stood and offered his arm to Elsie. You terrified him, Alaric whispered in his ear as they walked out. Good, Elsie whispered back. He reminds me of a ferret, a very expensive, annoying ferret. You handled them well, Alaric kissed her temple. You sound like a queen. I sounded like Sarah, Elsie admitted softly. She always said hungry people are angry people. If you feed them, they listen. Then let us feed them, Alaric agreed, and perhaps we can finally heal this kingdom.
Chapter 44. The Shadow of the Mountain. The night before the wedding was supposed to be a time of celebration, but sleep evaded the occupants of the royal suite. Elsie woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in the massive bed. Her skin was cold, damp with sweat. The nightmare clung to her like a cobweb, the image of the black spear, the sound of Sarah's gasp, the feeling of the void opening in her chest. Elsie? Alaric was awake instantly. He shifted, pulling her into his arms. His body was a furnace, grounding her in the physical world. I saw it again, Elsie whispered, trembling. I saw her die, and then I saw myself. I saw the thing I became. It wasn't human, Alaric. It didn't care about anything. It just wanted to eat the world. But you came back, Alaric soothed, rubbing circles on her back. You stopped. Only because you grabbed me, Elsie buried her face in his chest. What if it happens again? What if I get angry or scared and I hurt you?
I'm dangerous, Alaric. Maybe Drayton is right. Maybe I shouldn't be queen." Alaric pulled back, gripping her shoulders. The moonlight from the balcony filtered in, illuminating the serious set of his jaw and the jagged scar that ran down his neck. "Listen to me," Alaric said, his voice rough with sleep but intense. "Every alpha has a beast inside them. Every time I shift, I risk losing myself to the wolf. I risk forgetting my name, my duty, my humanity. I fight that war every single day." He took her hand and placed it over his heart. "We are not defined by the monsters inside us, Elsie. We are defined by the leash we put on them. You have a monster, I have a beast. Together we keep them in the dark." "A monster and a beast," Elsie managed a weak smile. "We sound like a terrible fairy tale." "The best fairy tales have teeth," Alaric grinned, leaning in to kiss her forehead. "Now, we have a wedding tomorrow, and if you have circles under your eyes, Madame Griselda will have an aneurysm." "We can't have that," Elsie sighed, leaning back into the pillows. "Hey, keep it down!" a grumpy voice came from the foot of the bed. Squeaky poked his head out from under a miniature velvet duvet Alaric had commissioned for him. The parrot looked ruffled and annoyed. "Some of us need our beauty sleep. I have a big job tomorrow. Ring bearer is a high-stress position. If I drop the ring, I have to flee the country. I need rest." "Sorry, Squeaky," Elsie chuckled. "Also, if I do a good job, can I have a hat? A tiny top hat?" "If you do a good job," Elsie stroked his feathers, feeling a wave of affection for the chaotic bird, "I will buy you 10 tiny top hats." "Deal," Squeaky nodded. "Now, go to sleep. You look puffy." Elsie lay back down, curled against Alaric's side. The nightmare was still there, lurking at the edges of her mind, but the warmth of the wolf and the sass of the parrot created a barrier the shadows couldn't cross. "Alaric," she whispered just as he was drifting off. "Thank you for catching me." Alaric tightened his arm around her. "Always. Now sleep, my storm. Tomorrow we make promises to the world." Outside, the moon shone down on a city that was scarred but standing, watching over a king and queen who were broken but healing, and in the silence of the night, the ghost of a baker seemed to smile.
Chapter 45. The Dress of Midnight. The morning of the wedding did not dawn with the chaotic flurry of bridesmaids and laughter that Elsie had once imagined. Instead, the royal suite was quiet, filled with a reverent, almost holy silence. Madame Griselda, usually a whirlwind of pins and shouting, moved with uncharacteristic softness. She adjusted the hem of the midnight blue silk, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the fabric over Elsie's hips. "It is unconventional, Your Majesty," Griselda whispered, stepping back, "but it is perfect. You look like the night sky before a storm." Elsie looked in the full-length mirror. The dress was a masterpiece. The dark blue silk shimmered with every breath, embroidered with silver threads that formed constellations, the wolf, the crow, and the indistinct swirling patterns of chaos. It had no corset, allowing her to breathe, to fight, to run. The slit in the skirt revealed white leather boots, practical and defiant. She reached up to touch the circlet of woven moon vines and raw amethyst crystals resting on her loose dark hair. It wasn't a heavy gold crown. It was wild and living. "You look scary," Squeaky commented from his perch on the vanity. The parrot was wearing a tiny, custom-made black velvet bow tie. He looked ridiculous and incredibly dapper, but in a good way, like a pretty thunderstorm. "Thanks, Squeaky," Elsie smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked at the velvet armchair in the corner of the room. It was empty. A pale yellow dress, the maid of honor's gown, lay folded neatly on the cushion, unworn. Elsie walked over to the chair. She placed her hand on the yellow fabric. It felt cold. She would have hated this silence. She would have been throwing fruit at me. She would be telling me my hair looks flat.
She would be eating the decorative soaps, Squeaky added, hopping onto the arm of the chair. He tilted his head, looking at the empty space. I miss the bread girl. She gave good scritches. I miss her too, Elsie choked out. There was a knock at the door. It wasn't Alaric. He was strictly forbidden from seeing her. It was Thomas, the royal baker. He entered the room hesitantly, holding a small bouquet. It wasn't made of expensive house-host roses. It was a simple bundle of wheat stalks, dried lavender, and white daisies, tied with a blue ribbon. Your Majesty, Thomas bowed low, his eyes wet. I found these in her garden. I thought, maybe. Elsie walked over to him and took the bouquet. The scent of lavender hit her, the same scent Sarah used to wear. Thomas, Elsie said, her voice shaking, you aren't supposed to bow to me. Your family. You're the queen, Elsie. Thomas straightened up, wiping his eyes with a flower-stained hand. And she would have been so proud. She would have marched you down that aisle herself if she could. Will you do it? Elsie asked suddenly. Do what? Walk with me, Elsie said, gripping the wheat bouquet. My father is gone. My best friend is gone. But you're here, and you're the only one who misses her as much as I do. Thomas looked at the witch queen, the woman who had broken a mountain and terrified a warlord. He saw the scared girl underneath the silk. It would be the honor of my life, Elsie, Thomas whispered, offering his arm. Elsie hooked her arm through his. She took a deep breath, steeling herself against the grief and the nerves. She looked at Squeaky. Are you ready, ring-bearer? I was born ready, Squeaky declared, grabbing the velvet pillow with his beak. Let's go get married. I want cake.
Chapter 46. The Walk of Solitude. The Cathedral of Eldoria was a cavern of stone and light. The stained glass windows cast multicolored pools on the floor, and the air was thick with the scent of incense and anticipation. The pews were packed. Every noble in the kingdom was there, dressed in their finest velvets and furs. But true to Alaric's promise, the back doors had been thrown open. The common people, the smiths, the farmers, the refugees from the north, filled the rear of the nave, standing shoulder to shoulder. At the altar stood King Alaric. He wore his formal military blacks, the high collar embroidered with the silver wolf of his house. His arm was out of the sling, though he held it stiffly against his side. He looked regal, dangerous, and utterly terrified. Sir Garrick stood beside him, whispering something that made Alaric crack a nervous smile. Then the music changed. The heavy organ notes swelled, vibrating in the chest of every person in the room. The great oak doors groaned open. A collective gasp swept through the cathedral. They expected a queen in white and gold. They got the knight. Elsie stepped into the light. The midnight blue dress seemed to absorb the shadows, making the silver embroidery blaze. She didn't look demure. She looked powerful. She walked down the long aisle, her arm linked with the heavy, limping figure of Thomas the baker. The sight of the commoner escorting the queen sent a ripple of shock through the nobility and a wave of pride through the crowd at the back. Squeaky flew ahead, carrying the ring pillow in his claws. He circled the vaulted ceiling once, squawking, look at me, before landing perfectly on the altar railing. As Elsie drew closer, Alaric's breath hitched. He saw the wheat bouquet, he saw Thomas, and he understood. When they reached the front, Thomas kissed Elsie's cheek. He turned to the king and bowed. Take care of her, Your Majesty. She breaks easily, but she mends hard. I will guard her with my life, Thomas, Alaric promised solemnly. Thomas stepped back, joining the front row where an empty seat had been left, draped in yellow silk. Alaric took Elsie's hands. His palms were warm and calloused. You look... Alaric struggled, his golden eyes burning. You look like the storm I've been waiting for my whole life. And you look like you forgot to breathe, Elsie whispered, squeezing his hands. The high priest began the ceremony, speaking of duty and bloodlines, but Elsie tuned him out. She only saw Alaric. She saw the scar on his jaw. She saw the way his thumb stroked her knuckles.
"The vows," the priest intoned. Alaric took a deep breath. He didn't use the scroll prepared for him. "I, Alaric, take you, Elsie. I take your chaos. I take your grief. I take your fire. You refused to bow to me in the mud, and you taught me that a king is nothing without a partner to stand beside him. I vow to be your anchor. I vow to hunt your nightmares, and I vow that you will never, ever be alone in the dark again." Elsie swallowed the lump in her throat. She looked into his eyes, the eyes of the wolf who had caught her when she fell from the void. "I, Elsie, take you, Alaric. I take your duty. I take your scars. I take your pack. You told me to pray to you, but you showed me that love isn't about worship. It's about being seen. I vow to be your peace. I vow to heal your wounds, and I vow to love you until the stars burn out and the mountains crumble." "The rings," the priest said, sniffling audibly. Alaric took the black witch iron ring and slid it onto Elsie's. Elsie took the heavy gold band and slid it onto his. "I pronounce you husband and wife, king and queen of Eldoria." Alaric didn't wait. He grabbed Elsie by the waist, pulled her flush against him, and kissed her with a fierce, desperate passion that made the entire cathedral erupt in cheers. "Finally!" Squeaky shrieked from the railing. "Now bring me the cake!"
Chapter 47. The Feast of Bittersweet Sugar. The reception in the Great Hall was less of a formal dinner and more of a riotous celebration of life. The tables were piled high with roasted meats, winter vegetables, and casks of ale. The music was loud, fiddles and drums driving a frantic rhythm that had nobles and commoners alike dancing on the tables. Elsie sat at the high table, her hand interlaced with Alaric's. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and happier than she had been in months. "You danced with Lord Drayton," Alaric teased, taking a sip of wine. "I thought you were going to turn him into a toad." "I considered it," Elsie laughed, "but I stepped on his toe, so I settled for freezing his wine solid when he wasn't looking. He spent 10 minutes trying to drink an ice cube." "Cruel," Alaric grinned, kissing her temple. "I love it." Suddenly, the music stopped. Thomas, the baker, stepped into the center of the room. He was pushing a cart covered in a white cloth. The hall went silent. "Your Majesties," Thomas's voice boomed, though it shook slightly. "A wedding needs a cake, and my daughter, she left a recipe." He pulled the cloth away. It wasn't a towering architectural masterpiece of fondant and spun sugar. It was a simple 3-tiered cake, frosted in rustic buttercream and decorated with fresh lemons and sprigs of lavender. "Lemon and lavender," Elsie whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Her favorite. Thomas cut the first slice. He brought it to the high table. "For the promise," Thomas said, softly, placing the plate before Elsie. Elsie looked at the cake. It smelled of summer. It smelled of the bakery on a warm morning. It smelled of Sarah. She picked up a fork. Her hand trembled. She took a bite. The flavor exploded on her tongue. Tart lemon, sweet cream, floral lavender. It was perfect. It tasted like love, and it tasted like goodbye. Tears spilled down Elsie's cheeks, dripping onto her midnight blue dress. But she didn't stop eating. She took another bite and another. "It's wonderful, Thomas," Elsie choked out. "It's the best thing I've ever tasted." Alaric took a fork and took a bite as well. He nodded solemnly. "Fit for a queen. Thank you, Thomas." The tension in the room broke. Thomas smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Squeaky," Elsie called out, wiping her eyes. "Come get your payment." Squeaky flew down from the rafters. He landed on the table next to the cake. "Is it walnut?" Squeaky asked suspiciously. "It's lemon. Try it." Squeaky took a peck. His eyes widened. It tastes like sunshine. I approve. I demand a whole tier." The crowd laughed. The music started up again, slower this time. Alaric stood up and offered his hand to Elsie. "Dance with me, wife," he murmured. Elsie took his hand. He led her to the floor.
As they swayed to the music, surrounded by their people, Elsie rested her head on his chest. She listened to the steady thump-thump of his heart, the heart that she had restarted with her own magic. "We made it," she whispered. "We did, and tomorrow we start rebuilding." "Tomorrow," Elsie nodded. She looked over Alaric's back. For a fleeting second near the kitchen doors, she thought she saw a flash of yellow linen and a flour-stained apron. She blinked, and it was gone. But the scent of lemon lingered in the air, a sweet, ghostly reminder that love never really leaves. It just changes shape. "I love you, Wolf," Elsie whispered. "I love you, Storm," Alaric replied. And in the heart of the broken, beautiful city, they danced until the dawn.
Chapter 48. The Morning of the Wolf. The sun that streamed into the royal suite felt different than before. It wasn't the harsh glare with siege, nor the gray light of morning. It was soft, golden, and carried the sound of a city waking up to peace. Elsie stirred, stretching beneath the heavy fur duvet. Her body ached, not from magic or war, but from dancing until her feet were blistered. She rolled over, expecting to hit the cool emptiness of the mattress. Instead, she hit a wall of warm, solid muscle. Alaric was still asleep. The fearsome Wolf King, the unbroken alpha, was sprawled on his back, one arm thrown over his eyes, snoring softly. His hair was a mess, and the sheet had slipped down to his waist, revealing the fresh, pink scar where the axe had broken his ribs. Elsie propped herself up on her elbow, watching him. For months, she had seen him as a warrior, a protector, a king. But here, in the quiet of the morning, he was just a man who drooled slightly on his pillow. She reached out and traced the line of the scar on his chest. Alaric didn't open his eyes, but a lazy smile spread across his face. "If you keep doing that, I'm going to be late for the council meeting." "The council can wait," Elsie whispered. "You're the king. You make the schedule." "And you're the queen," Alaric mumbled, cracking one golden eye open, "which means you're supposed to be the responsible one." "I am responsible," Elsie poked his ribs gently. "I'm inspecting the structural integrity of the monarchy." Alaric laughed, a deep rumble that vibrated through the bed. He reached out and pulled her on top of him, wrapping his arms around her waist. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling deeply. "You smell like lavender and cake." "Don't mention cake," Elsie groaned. "I ate 3 slices. I think I'm made of buttercream." "I love buttercream," Alaric kissed her shoulder. The moment was perfect, quiet, intimate, safe. Then a scratching sound came from the foot of the bed. Ahem. So lowly, they turned their heads. Squeaky was standing on the footboard. He was still wearing his tiny black velvet bow tie from the wedding. He looked unimpressed. "I have been awake for an hour. I have not been fed, I have not been praised, and the water bowl in my cage is lukewarm. This is unacceptable working conditions." Alaric sighed, dropping his head back onto the pillow. "I am going to roast that bird." "I heard that," Squeaky shrieked. "Mutiny! I'll tell the council you sleep with a teddy bear." "I do not," Alaric sat up indignantly. "He does," Elsie whispered loudly to Squeaky. "It's a stuffed wolf named Mr. Bitey." Alaric turned 50 shades of red. "It was a gift from my mother when I was 5. Elsie burst out laughing, the sound ringing through the room. It felt good to laugh. It felt like the final pieces of the darkness were breaking away. "Come on, Mr. Bitey," Elsie kissed Alaric's cheek, sliding out of bed. "Let's get breakfast, before the bird starts a revolution." Alaric watched her walk to the wardrobe, wearing his oversized shirt. He looked at the sunlight hitting her hair, at the ring on her finger, at the peace in her shoulders. "Elsie?" Alaric called out. She turned, holding a silk robe. "Yes?" "I love you," Alaric said. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, factual, and absolute. Elsie smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her hazel eyes. "I know. Now get up. Squeaky wants walnuts." Chapter 49. The View from the Tower. 6 months had passed since the wedding.
The seasons had turned, bringing a crisp, natural autumn to Eldoria. The harvest had been bountiful, bolstered by the supply lines opened with the integrated northern clans. The walls were rebuilt, stronger and higher than before. Elsie walked through the courtyard, flanked by 2 wolf knights. She wore a heavy cloak of green wool against the chill. She carried a basket, as she did every week. She climbed the stairs of the North Tower. The guards saluted her as she passed. "Open it," Elsie commanded softly. The heavy iron door swung open. The room beyond was warm, divided by the glass wall. On the right, Genevieve the wolf was sleeping on a rug. When Elsie entered, her tail thumped a lazy rhythm on the floor. Elsie tossed a large, marrow-filled bone through the chute. Genevieve pounced on it happily, gnawing contentedly. On the left, Warlord Roderick sat in his chair by the window. He was thinner now, his hair completely white. He didn't rock back and forth anymore. He just stared. He stared out the window at the city below. He saw the smoke rising from the chimneys. He saw the new market stalls with colorful awnings. He saw children playing in the square where his army had once stood. He saw life, thriving and loud, completely indifferent to his existence. "Uncle," Elsie said. Roderick turned his head slowly. His eyes were still milky, but there was a flicker of recognition and deep, crushing bitterness. "You look well," Roderick rasped, his voice unused. "Fat, happy." "The kingdom is prospering," Elsie said, placing a loaf of bread on the ledge. "The Frostblood clans have settled in the valley. They are learning to farm. They like it better than starving." "They are wolves who have forgotten how to hunt," Roderick spat, though the venom was weak. "They are wolves who realized they don't have to eat their own young to survive," Elsie corrected him. She walked to the glass. She looked at him, searching for the anger she used to feel. It was gone. All she felt was a distant pity, like looking at a bug trapped in amber. "I won't be coming next week," Elsie said. Roderick frowned. "Why? Tired of gloating?" "No," Elsie touched her stomach unconsciously. "I have other duties to attend to. The physician says I need to rest, but the guards will bring your bread." Roderick looked at her hand on her stomach. His eyes widened. He understood. "A child. A chaos child?" "A child," Elsie said firmly. "Just a child who will never know your name, Roderick, who will never know fear." Roderick turned back to the window. His shoulders slumped. This was his true punishment. Not death, not pain, but the knowledge that his bloodline was continuing, stronger than ever, and he had absolutely no part in it. He was a footnote in Elsie's history. "Go," Roderick whispered. "Leave me to my view." Elsie turned and walked out. She didn't look back. She descended the stairs, leaving the ghosts in the tower. The air outside smelled of burning leaves and roasting chestnuts. It smelled of the future. Squeaky was waiting for her at the bottom of the stairs, perched on a gargoyle. "Squeaky with the creepy uncle?" Squeaky asked. "Done," Elsie nodded. "Good, because Alaric is freaking out. He's in the throne room. He thinks he lost the treaty with the Southern Isles. He's checking under the rugs." Elsie laughed. "Let's go save the king."
Chapter 50. The Final Prayer. The throne room was bustling. Ambassadors from the Southern Isles, dressed in bright silks and feathers, were presenting gifts to the crown. Alaric sat on the wolf throne, looking regal but slightly stressed as he tried to decipher the heavy accent of the lead diplomat. Elsie entered through the side door. The herald banged his staff. "Her Majesty, Queen Elspeth." The room bowed. Alaric jumped up, relief washing over his face. He hurried down the steps to meet her, taking her hand and leading her to the matching throne beside his. "Thank the gods," Alaric whispered. "This man has been talking about fish tariffs for 40 minutes. I am ready to declare war just to make him stop." "Patience, Wolf." Elsie squeezed his hand. "Smile and nod." The diplomat finished his speech and presented a chest of pearls. Alaric nodded graciously. "We accept your gift,"
Alaric boomed, "and we welcome the friendship of the South." Then it happened, the funny twist Elsie had been dreading and expecting. Squeaky, who had been hiding in the rafters, decided this was his moment. He swooped down, landing directly on the diplomat's feathered hat. "Hello, Birdman," Squeaky screeched into the ambassador's ear. "I like your hat. It looks like a dead chicken." The ambassador gasped, freezing in terror. Your Majesty, this beast—" "He is the royal advisor," Elsie said quickly, trying not to laugh. "He has unique insights." Squeaky hopped onto the table. "I have news! Big news! The Queen ate a pickle! A whole jar!" The court went silent. Alaric froze. He turned slowly to look at Elsie. "A pickle?" Alaric asked, his voice trembling. "Elsie, you hate pickles." Elsie turned bright red. She glared at the parrot. "Squeaky, that was confidential." "Confidential means tell everyone loudly," Squeaky declared, bowing to the crowd. "There is a pup in the oven, a bun, a tiny human." The silence stretched, for one heartbeat, then two. Alaric stood up. He looked at Elsie, his eyes wide, gold, and shining with sudden tears. "Elsie? Is the bird? Is he telling the truth?" Elsie sighed, smiling shyly. She stood up and took Alaric's hand, placing it on her stomach. "He is, though I was planning to tell you with a nice dinner, not a parrot announcement." Alaric didn't speak. He simply picked her up, right there in front of the ambassadors, the court, and the guards, and spun her around, burying his face in her neck. "A pup," he laughed, a joyous, uninhibited sound. "A little storm." The court erupted into cheers. The Southern ambassador looked confused but started clapping anyway. Squeaky flew up to the chandelier. "I did it! I broke the news! I am the best! Name the baby Squeaky, Squeaky the Second." "We are not naming the heir Squeaky," Alaric said, setting Elsie down but refusing to let go of her waist. He looked at her, his forehead resting against hers. The crowd faded away. The politics faded away. It was just the wolf and the witch. "You're going to be a terrible father," Elsie teased, wiping a tear from his eye. "You'll let them get away with everything." "And you will be a terrifying mother," Alaric countered. "They will be turning their vegetables into chocolate by age 3. "Good," Elsie grinned. Alaric leaned back, looking at her with that intense alpha gaze that had started it all in the muddy market so long ago. "You know," Alaric whispered, a playful smirk touching his lips, "that technically the heir to the throne outranks everyone, even you." "Oh," Elsie raised an eyebrow, violet sparks dancing in her eyes. "Are you suggesting I should bow?" Alaric laughed, shaking his head. He dropped to one knee, kissing her hand, then pressing a kiss to her stomach. "Never." Alaric looked up at her, his eyes full of devotion. "I learned my lesson, Elsie. I don't want you to bow." He stood up and pulled her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of chaos, love, and lemon cakes. "Now," Alaric whispered against her lips, "you pray to me." Elsie laughed, pulling him down for another kiss. "In your dreams, Wolf. In your dreams."
Epilogue: The Era of Wildflowers. 5 years later, the mud in the lower market of Aldoria was gone. The streets were paved with smooth, pale stone, and the air smelled not of rotting cabbage, but of fresh bread and blooming jasmine. The kingdom had changed. It was no longer a place of black iron and fear. It was a place where wolf knights walked patrol with flowers braided into their manes by village children, and where hedge witches set up stalls in the main square to sell potions openly, without fear of the pyre. In the royal gardens, the chaos was of a different kind. "Get back here, you little terror!" Squeaky shrieked, flapping his wings frantically as he chased a small, giggling blur across the lawn. The blur was Prince Rowan. He was 4 years old, had his father's dark hair and his mother's hazel eyes, and he was currently floating 2 feet off the ground while simultaneously growling like a wolf pup. "No!" Rowan laughed, tumbling through the air. "I am a dragon!" "You are a menace!" Squeaky landed on a statue of King Alaric, panting.
The parrot was wearing a tiny golden cape, a gift from the queen for his services to the realm. "Elsie, your spawn is defying gravity again." Elsie sat on a stone bench under the shade of an ancient oak tree. She was peeling an orange, watching her son levitate with a look of fond exasperation. He gets it from his father, the stubbornness, not the flying. "I heard that," a deep voice rumbled. King Alaric walked into the garden. He had just come from a council meeting, but he had already discarded his formal jacket. His white shirt was unlaced at the throat, revealing the faint silver scar that still ran down his neck. The years had been kind to him. The lines of stress around his eyes had smoothed out, replaced with laugh lines. He walked over to Elsie, ignoring the floating toddler for a moment. He bent down and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that made Squeaky cover his eyes with a wing. "Gross," the parrot muttered. "Get a room." Alaric pulled back, smirking. He plucked a slice of orange from Elsie's hand and ate it. "Where is the heir to the throne?" Elsie pointed. "Currently orbiting the rose bushes." Alaric turned. He saw his son hovering near the fountain, trying to catch a butterfly with a burst of harmless violet sparks. "Rowan," Alaric called. He didn't use his alpha roar. He used his dad voice. "Feet on the grass, pup." Rowan looked at his father. The boy sighed, the violet light faded, and he dropped gently to the grass. He ran over, tackling Alaric's legs. "Papa, I made the cat purple." "Did you now?" Alaric chuckled, scooping the boy up and tossing him into the air. Rowan shrieked with delight. "We'll have to apologize to the cat and the cook." Elsie stood up, brushing her skirts. She walked over to them, leaning her head on Alaric's shoulder. She watched her family, the wolf, the witch, the hybrid son, and the spirit bird. "It's peaceful," Elsie whispered. "It is," Alaric agreed, shifting Rowan to his hip. "Roderick passed last night, Elsie. The guards found him in his chair, looking out at the city." Elsie felt a flicker of old sadness, but it was distant now, like a storm that had passed years ago. "Did he say anything?" "No," Alaric shook his head. "He just stopped." "Then the winter is truly over," Elsie said softly. She looked toward the castle gates. A wagon was arriving from the bakery. Thomas was bringing the weekly delivery of lemon cakes. The sign above the bakery now read, "Sarah's Hearth," and it was the most popular spot in the city. "Come," Alaric said, taking her hand. "Thomas is here, and if we don't get there first, Squeaky will eat all the frosting." "I am already on my way." Squeaky zoomed past them, toward the gate. "Out of the way, peasants. The king needs sugar." Elsie laughed, squeezing Alaric's hand. They walked through the garden together, not as a king leading a subject, but as partners walking side by side. "You know," Alaric whispered, leaning down to her ear as they walked, "you never did curtsy to me again." Elsie looked up at him, her eyes sparkling with mischief and magic. "And I never will, Wolf King," she promised. Alaric smiled, the golden light in his eyes burning with nothing but love. "Good. I prefer you standing tall."